from final stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't
started. Right. Well, good morning, Mayor and Council members. Thank you for this opportunity to present and welcome to Engineering Services one-on-one session, which is part 2 of Planning and Engineering one-on-one. The part 1 was presented on April 25th. So this is kind of a second part to it. So my name is Donnie George, Director of Engineering, and we have our engineering staff here online and some of our planning staff as well to help us with each of the part of the workshop presentation today by each branch. It's been a month and a half since we met last, so maybe a quick introduction. We have Michaela Hanley, Infrastructure Planning and Asset Management Branch Manager. There she is. And she's also joined by Tanya Hines and Lorraine DeBlanco, presenting on parts of the presentation from that team. And then we have Jonathan Reed from Development Engineering, Manager for Development Engineering side of things. Timothy Saunders from Capital Projects Office, Manager. And Dean Schick, obviously you know him, Transportation Manager. And he's joined by Faisal Kanji. He's an infrastructure engineer to help us with parts of that presentation with. That's the quick intro. Okay. Trying to move my slide.
You got your phone.
Oh, yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. There we go. It's kind of a quick overview of the agenda that we're going to cover from now till about 1:30, and it's been recorded so we can watch it. If anybody has to leave in between, can be watched online. For the rest of the workshop, we'll go through some high level as well as some in-depth discussion on many facets of engineering function, especially how it's integrated with the planning and development department and across the organization. We'll also discuss quickly the resources and organizational overview. We have just recently completed a mid-year departmental plan, which would likely guide us in the next 3 to 5 years. We have collectively created a mandate and values update on the department. So we'll go through that quickly as well. Discuss areas where council could influence on the functions and programs that we have and distinguish it from administrative priorities and functions. Then we'll go through each of our 4 branches, which would technically be on its own department with an array of functions and programs that we deliver. And we finally close it off with some departmental challenges, goals, and next 3 to 5 years of goals and the next steps that we can do. We do have a planned break during lunch break, I believe, and Mayor can call off break anytime. We can stop and have Q&A in between, and if anybody has a question, we can stop and have that answered as well. We do have Q&A after each branch presentation and also at the end. So there's a few opportunities to ask questions and get that answered. At the workshop, part 1, Adrian and team completed on April 25th. We have touched on planning hierarchy. And this slide shows where we left off. And I just wanted to highlight on how engineering involvement progresses across the planning phases, starting with MDP, and our involvement gets larger and bigger and more intense towards the subdivision services and inspection of constructed assets. This is another way of showing a bit more zoomed in version of the development phase where engineering review comes into play as early as ASP, and we move into subdivision condition approval with planning. We have a lot of involvement back and forth through that process, and then goes through development permitting process, and then at the building permit, it's hands off, and then we come in through the inspection phase when the assets gets created. I know you're familiar with this slide. What it shows is how we are integrated within the organization. The wheels are spinning too fast for engineering, right? And the next few slides will emphasize the fact that engineering will not and cannot function in silos. Anything we touch impacts others. So this slide represents.
Planning doesn't connect up with finances.
Projects are going the wrong way.
On their own way. Could have made it a little bit closer, but
Don't look too close. Okay, it was a nice graphic.
So this slide represents that we are.
Can I interrupt? You had on the previous slide, you had IDP. We don't have any IDPs anymore.
Not right now.
Not right now. Yeah.
If we had an IDP, it would be with Sturgeon, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could
Yeah. So anyway,
discussion about it.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Where are we in that?
They have postponed our meetings a number of times in a row, so we're just Waiting to discuss with them.
Okay, thanks.
Anyway, this intent of this slide is just to represent we are joined at the hip with planning and development, and we are siblings with finance, IT, economic development, and close cousins with all other departments, engineering.
Spinning on their own. Right?
Okay, let's move on. All right, so when engineering looks at all programs and its functions, we have a close vertical integration with finance and IT, from budget preparation, completion and delivery to day-to-day invoicing and accounts payable items. We also manage procurement of all contracts within engineering in close connection with our procurement department, almost like a hub and spoke model. So with environment now with HR, we interact and collaborate with HR closely on all environmental aspects, and safety is also high on every project and programs that we manage. Of course, with a massive portfolio of delivering the capital projects and some specialized programs in transportation and other branches, we work very closely with our communication department in delivering the best possible communication to our residents, stakeholders, and also our elected officials. This is a pretty important graph. I know it's quite busy, but I'll take you through it quickly. This slide is going to stay with us throughout this presentation. We'll just zoom into the areas that we will discuss as we go through each of the branch and functions. So if you zoom into the engineering department, which is contained in that blue trapezoidal figure, we have 4 branches represented in 4 colors: infrastructure planning and asset management in orange. We also have utility engineering and corporate asset management also colored in orange, which is kind of a sub-program associated with the Ipam team. So they are major programs, so I thought it was worthwhile to highlight those, and they will have their own presentation upcoming in later on. And then we have the development engineering team represented in green, and capital projects delivery office in cyan, and transportation engineering in blue. As you can notice here, the planning and development department is joined at the hip with engineering and connected with 3 out of the 4 branches throughout the whole process that we just showed earlier. You may also notice that what is being planned is being implemented by the development engineering team and the capital projects office, who then reports on the tangible capital asset and asset portfolio moves into the asset management world, which is the corporate AM. The 2 bubbles are in gray and purple we have shown is the rest of the city's asset groups, about 25 of them who interacts and collaborates with the AM team and the CPO, which is our capital projects office, to help with the capital plan, program, and delivery. So it's a pretty complicated function that we manage within. Now, how do we function efficiently? As you have seen in the earlier slide, with the complexities of the function and programs, we have 3, no magic bullet, but 3 special steps that we follow consistently. One is having clearly integrated process, which is constantly in flux and improvement, and we rely on our strategic services group to continuously help us improve upon. Second is highly functional resource, which means the best talent and technology culminating within each functional group, which we rely on our HR and IT resource to help us achieve the best results. And last function, delivery of these complex integrated functions by the best engineering staff complement, which is our invaluable resource. And you will get to hear from them, some of them today as they were introduced at the beginning. So within the engineering department, we have 4 branches: infrastructure planning and asset management, capital projects office, the development engineering, and transportation. We followed the same color theme, so you can follow throughout the presentation, so maybe easier. The first one on the list is capital projects office, and we have 8 staff, 8 FTE, 3 temp, 4 senior PMs, 3 project managers, 1 project resource coordinator, and 1 project administrator, and 1 manager. And then 1 temp PM, we try to hire as required, depending on capacity needs. And then the 2 term engineering students, we usually hire every year, about 4 to 8 months term to help us through. Next we have is the infrastructure planning and asset management branch. Ipam team consists of 8 FTEs, which includes the manager, supervisor of long-term engineering, storm and land compliance coordinator, who takes care of all the storm bylaws, and then 2 utility engineers, the GIS analyst, asset management team of specialists, and a senior asset management specialist. Next we have is the development engineering staff, 5 full-time FTE, full-time equivalents, 2 engineering development supervisors, 1 landscape tech, and 1 engineering tech, and 1 manager. They're a small group, but a mighty team to get all the inspections completed on time. And we also have one term student for 4 months to support them through the summer. John's group is clearly at capacity this year with the influx of permitting that occurred last year through Adrian's team. So we are in the process of hiring one or more term positions, if not two, to help with all required inspections on the contributed assets, including landscaping. Last but not the least is our transportation engineering group. They have 11 FTEs, one temp and one term student. They provide a bunch of programs, and Dean and Faisal will provide us with an overview later in the presentation. So first on mandate, I'll just quickly go through the mid-year plan that we've completed. We developed a department mandate through a collaborative departmental process with the creative help of our stat services. As a department, this is how we have defined ourselves: engineering services stewards the city's infrastructure, which enables connectivity and growth while adhering to professional standards and regulation. Our customers can expect a high level of service and high quality sustainable infrastructure through collaboration. Our values are depicted on the slide. I'm not going to go through in details. It's based on integrity, accountability, collaboration, and continuous improvement in all that we do. This slide is a quick one. Apart from knowing how the department functions and interacts, this is probably one of the slides which shows the swim lanes between governance and administrative levels where council could make the most impact, shown in the governance level. So where it comes down to is the MGA, council policies, bylaws and regulations, budget, service level inventory. Those are kind of the interaction points where we have with council and elected officials in terms of how to improve anything that engineering does. And then on the corporate administrative level, we have directives, guidelines, corporate technology and application that interacts with all of our functions on day-to-day basis. Some of the examples of council policies could be capital projects management, Cpo to an example, where council has defined and mandated corporate-wide approach to management and delivery of capital projects. Another one that you get to see every year is Tanya's update of the offsite levy. So that's a policy that's guiding us. At the department level, we are focused mostly on master plan updates. We have utility master plans as well as transportation master plans residing with us. There's a bunch of modeling work that they do, water, sewer, storm modeling works. There's a ton of process and guidelines that affect us. We also have the professional practice management plan under the APEGA. It falls under the ECP Act, which is Engineers and Geophysicists Act, which means professionals may be permit holders and accountable for compliance as per the APEGA requirements. It's similar to what Scott Hubley has presented as a quality management plan under the planning arm. So it's similar to the Safety Codes Act we have to comply with. Go ahead, Councilor.
Lonnie, are you going to talk in your presentation at some point this morning around master plans and their utility for your organization?
We can, yeah. Not in depth, we can touch on it as part of the infrastructure planning and asset management branch. They are the ones who interacts mostly with the master plan on the utility side. The budget remains with the utility group, but we are on the stakeholder list to make that happen as well. Yeah. Right, so any questions so far? So we'll jump right into the branch presentation now on. So we got Tanya Hines. Michaela is quite new to the organization, so Tanya and Lorraine offered to provide the presentation on asset management and infrastructure planning as we were preparing the slides. So go ahead, Tanya. And this is the slide that I said will stay with us. So I've highlighted the orange colored groups within IPAM.
Okay, so the Infrastructure Planning and Asset Management Group is one of the engineering branches. It is one of the most diverse branches, and we have many small specialized function groups within it. So that means we're just like one person, so in each group. We're here today to explain how the IPAM branch and how we interact with each other, and we support the city's planning and development functions and processes. The main purpose of IPAM is to develop and implement the interim and long-term strategic policies and procedures related to long-term growth, land development, and asset management in the city. So one of the positions is the supervisor of long-term engineering, and those responsibilities are to represent engineering interests in steering and other project committees. We initiate, manage, and support growth servicing studies. We review applications or establish conditions related to engineering and utilities and long-term land development requirements under the municipal development plan, area structure plans, land use bylaw, and subdivision and development applications. Manage the offsite levy program. I also process and draft all the development agreements and specialized development agreement amendments. We ensure all of the engineering conditions from approved subdivisions have been satisfactorily met during the subdivision endorsement process. And we review and negotiate and approve the land registration documents the city has an interest in. And that includes all of our utility right-of-ways and restrictive covenants. Our Stormland Compliance Coordinator, this is probably one of the most public-facing roles in engineering. So the Stormland Compliance Coordinator is responsible for reviewing all surface drainage bylaw concerns and encroachments onto city property or other city interests. The Compliance Coordinator conducts the initial investigations, she provides recommendations, coordinates with staff to solve matters, and mediates with homeowners. In addition to this, she also reviews and prepares a number of city land interest agreements, such as all encroachment agreements and many standard URW documents, and especially in support of CPO projects. She also reviews all the crossing agreements that get sent to the city engineer for execution. And one other function she has is she provides information to residents related to their agreements, their URWs, restrictive covenants, anything that might be registered on their land title. And additionally, she leads or participates in the development review and revision of city regulations, policies, and bylaws.
Tanya,
Yes.
can we just interrupt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tanya, so Ken McKay here. So in
Yep.
relation to the first bullet, you know, your provides recommendations for what are there a common type of concerns residents have? Is it more confined to swales or like drainage issues? What are the biggest concerns that our residents bring to this individual?
So with relation to surface drainage bylaw, a lot of them are generally between property owners. So somebody will be receiving surface drainage from another property. The biggest challenge with this position is that typically if your yard is graded correctly, no matter where that water comes from, it'll move into those established patterns and flow to the street. So typically what will happen is if we receive a complaint, there's issues on both properties. And so managing the expectations of property owners, because typically people don't want to hear that they also have to fix the problems in their own yard. So it's managing responsibilities between property owners sometimes. That's probably the biggest issue she deals with.
Somebody's sump pump doesn't drain out onto the street, it drains into somebody's window.
And
Pretty
roof
much.
leaders- And roof leaders has been a major one. People just drain into the next door backyard, right? So
Yeah.
we have to go in there, yeah.
Yeah, so but when they're doing compliance certificate, so I mean, they don't go out there, do home construction and say you're graded wrongly or you're graded correctly, right? It's basically complaint driven then?
Yes, it's complaint driven. And actually the city of St. Albert does not have a final lot grading inspection service. So they only do rough grade inspections when houses are starting to be built. So that's at clay. And so compliance certificates don't look at that surface drainage bylaw at all. They just look at encroachments from an engineering perspective.
And we just,
What would you mean by encroachments in that situation? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so sometimes people, the biggest challenge is that people don't often know where their property line starts. So between the sidewalk and their property line. So a lot of times people will put things like retaining walls, things like that. So those are actually in the road right of way. So sometimes they're built over top of, like, we might have some sanitary lines or storm lines, things like that. So we typically have a very soft approach to encroachment. So if people want to keep them, if there's no serious safety concerns or things like that, we'll work with them to get those authorized. And so they typically have to get an encroachment agreement, which gets registered on their title and runs with it. Another one is a lot of people have utility right of ways, especially in the older neighborhoods. They're in the backyards. So where you have the overhead lines. And so a lot of times you end up with shed encroachments and things like that. So some of those, we don't need to necessarily do encroachment agreements, but we do have to get permission from the private utility companies, like so ATCO Gas and Fortis and things like that. So their types of concerns are obviously anything that could interfere. So ATCO doesn't like sheds that have power in them and things like that. So sometimes they'll authorize them to remain, but they make them take the power out, things like that.
So wait, I mean, would you also have to deal with encroachments as they come down to stormwater ponds? Would you deal with that with your area, or is that a different area?
It should come through us as well, yeah.
Yeah, so you mean if it comes onto public property?
Yeah, sometimes you see some, particularly in our, probably 10 years ago, some of our residents built right down to or cut the grass right down to the stormwater, and likewise. Have we had any concerns related to that?
We typically deal with more hard infrastructure. So it's like structures and things like that, not necessarily inappropriate mowing and things like that. A lot of times that is more about education with people. It's just explaining to them why we might want to keep something more natural and things like that. We do have a number of park encroachments. That is something that we have been trying to resolve, but with a soft approach, it's up to, we've been working with residents to resolve that, but the new parks bylaw actually has an encroachment section in it now. So that's quite helpful for us if we want to start taking a more active response to encroachments into parkland.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And then go to the next slide, Donnie, please.
There you go.
Okay, so the utilities engineers, they review all the land development submissions. So those are DAs and DPs. They also look at the area structure plan, capital project proposals, and submissions from a utilities perspective. And they rely on things like the city's engineering standards and other applicable regulations. They'll support development of short-term and long-term asset management and capital plans regarding repair, maintenance, and rehabilitation. They develop and manage the utility master plans and those associated documents. They also process utility-related issues or inquiries on development projects, or development agreements and engineering deviations. They also provide technical support to utility operations for best practices. Some of the other things they do is they will maintain the city's hydraulic models for our water, sewer, and stormwater management systems. And on an annual basis, they review the utility asset condition rating methodology and update based on current industry standards. So this can include things like reviewing internal and contracted annual CCTV programs for both wastewater and stormwater. They review the CCTV data to develop the rehabilitation list, and they will report on updated condition ratings of those systems. They also will oversee the scoping, procurement, and management of professional design service contracts for our RMR projects. And they also provide project management on major utility studies related to capital or to utilities.
Tanya, can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
So the utility master plans, we have it where we're putting in 1.2 million over every 5 years for utility master plans. But then it has in here that one person's developing and managing that. So can you expand on that?
So typically they will, we use an outside consultant for those master plans. So they would be they will help, they'll provide support to it, and they'll work with them to develop it. And so they'll be kind of the main stakeholder, but we're not doing the master planning ourselves.
And why is that?
I would say it's mostly because we don't have the manpower, and I don't want to speak totally to this, but I think we're also not, I don't know if our APEGA coverage is for that, like for design. Donnie, you might want to provide some additional.
Updating on a master plan on a 5-year basis is a major undertaking. Like you said, it's in that order of 800,000 to $1 million and more. So in usual case, we hire a consultant to get that updated. There's a lot of modeling update that goes behind the scene, a lot of truthing in terms of the actual flows and whatnot that we see on the field as well gets updated. So what the utility engineers are kind of the lead on that master plan from our end, but we also have most of the city departments involved as stakeholders as we progress through that project implementation of developing the master plan. which usually takes about 18 months roughly in a major update. But in between the master plans, we also have model update. That's what the utility engineers are capable of doing, because as soon as we have new growth nodes get connected, we have to do a boundary condition analysis and get that updated as part of the development. So they are in tune with any modeling update that we can do in-house. That's what they are capable of doing internally.
So we're not capable of doing a utility master plan update ourselves. We're only able to do the modeling.
We don't have the capacity, like one person cannot do it, so we have to source it out.
Okay, but could we not just contract it, like hire a temporary staff to do it? Or what would be the problem with that?
That's the same thing that we do, and either contract a temporary staff, or we can contract it out to a consultant who does this, master plan. They're experts in that. So Michaela just unmuted. Maybe she can supply a little bit more explanation to it. And does that answer Councilor Broadhead's question earlier, or do we have to tackle that?
So we do it every 5 years. So explain the fundamental nature of why you need a master plan in the first place.
Okay.
How do we do that?
Okay. Do you want to take that, Michaela?
I can take that, sure. Maybe to go back, why don't we hire somebody temporary? It typically is a very specialized area of engineering. So you can't hire a summer student to do this. You can't hire a co-op student to do this. It does require quite a bit of experience and effort. And then in terms of utility master plans, you need to know what you have and where you're going with your things. You wouldn't go on a trip and decide on the day that you're going on a trip and go to the airport and say, can I buy tickets now? You have to plan it, or else you have this, not or else, because our infrastructure is underground. It takes a lot of, you have to do it before everything else. You can't cover it up with the road and then you go back and dig up the road to put your infrastructure in. So that's why you want to plan. You want to right size your infrastructure. So you understand what's going on, and that's why we master plan. So we look to the future, we look to planning to see what's going to come in, and then we decide where our big infrastructure is going and our smaller infrastructure, so that we can have it ready when the development happens. They know what they're going to put in underground, because once it's underground, it disappears, and and I like to say it's often forgotten about. Nobody cares about the underground until it doesn't work.
Does that explain why we need master plans at all?
If I can step in, otherwise you would just have ad hoc, as you added a
Yes.
developer on, you would have ad hoc, and it would be kind of a mixed match.
Inefficiencies,
It
yes.
ends up being more expensive servicing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
inefficient.
yeah, and basically it sets the standards for what size utility,
Right.
what
Yeah.
type of there. So everybody kind of knows that going in when they start developing their area.
Absolutely. And then it also talks to the major infrastructure that Michaela talked about. Do we need an additional reservoir if we expand X hectares more from a planning side of things? So we look at, I don't want to call it a crystal ball. It's sort of like a crystal ball planning for the next 20, 30 years. We need another reservoir by year 20. Where it's going, here's where it can be plugged. And we need to look at the topography and whatnot to then site the actual infrastructure like lift stations and pump stations, booster stations, whatever we need for.
That's the other part that's good to remember, is that wastewater and stormwater has to follow the laws of gravity. So if we're not thinking about what we're doing, we build something in the low spot, and then we can't use that spot anymore for our flow to go through there. And it creates more infrastructure and more operations and maintenance.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the other things we use the utility master plans for is to actually develop and manage the offsite levy program. Because if we don't know what that major infrastructure is, we use that to help us determine the service basins and things like that. So we know who is contributing and we know what area to attribute those projects to, so that we can collect the right rates to make sure that they get fully funded through the development industry.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Does that explain, Councillor Hughes, your question somewhat?
Yeah, somewhat. I might have more this afternoon. I know we have a budget related question on it, so I'll just wait the rest this afternoon so we can get going. It's all good.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So the next slide, please. So, and our final team member is our Ipam GIS analyst. So GIS is used for data management of city-owned assets and services, creating maps to display where these assets and data are located, and to help make informed decisions regarding these assets. So maps and the analysis of GIS data can help city planners and other municipal employees to understand better how their city assets and services are helping its residents. So the Ipam GIS analyst creates, implements, analyzes, and maintains the spatial data sets for our underground infrastructure. So that's our water, our storm, and our wastewater. And they help in asset management. So that's with location and quantities, asset maintenance. So they look at life cycle status, PW operations maintenance, and they also do like online map tracking for them. And they also help with asset valuations. So that's the annual tangible capital asset summary from the new development engineering projects that have been brought on. They also make maps and other decision-making procedures from a digital environment. So the analysts can provide expertise, support, and guidance to various geographic variables in a very specific area. That's our department in a nutshell. I like to call us a herd of unicorns, but
We do have many unicorns in engineering. We tried hard. Any question for infrastructure?
My son's an engineer. I know what you're talking about.
Any questions for Tanya before we move on, all the infrastructure planning function itself? Good. Thank you. Let's move on to John Reed on the development engineering branch.
Hi there. Thanks, Donnie. My name is John Reed. I'll be going over the major activities that are the responsibility of the development engineering group. And just to give you a heads up, I feel that our group is not as flashy, but really important. And I do like to talk about ourselves a lot. So my presentation may run long, so I'll try and quicken it up as much as possible. But if I'm going too fast, please stop me and let me know if you have any questions, as well as I already have some lingering questions from our previous presentation that I've kind of implemented into the presentation here as well. So if you do see something, it'll come up at some point, okay? From that, development engineering plays an important role of translating the items that are done in the planning and development phases and bring those to the real world assets over to the city. As you can see, we work with planning, development, IPAM, utility engineering, transportation engineering, corporate asset management, but we also work closely with our rec and parks teams, public operations, utility operations, transit, communications, municipal enforcement services, fire services, and economic development teams. All these different groups are responsible for helping to build our city, and we're continually working collaboratively to get the best results for the city. So Donnie jumped ahead of me a little there.
Sorry.
No worries. So the main purposes of development engineering are, sorry, my pages are all over the place. Ensuring the hard infrastructure that is donated by developers to the city has been built to the city's municipal engineering standards. Ensure any connections to the city services are done in a manner that will not adversely affect any of the current city infrastructure. And this includes any sort of pipe connections for storm, water, or sewer, as well as overland connections such as grading. Working with third-party utility providers like TELUS, Shaw, ACO, Fortis to allow them to complete their work in the road right-of-ways. And we also update and maintain the engineering standards. Next slide. So this one I'm going to talk quite a bit on, and it's one of the big items that I want to go over because it can be confusing to both residents as well as every general person that isn't living the engineering life day in, day out. So what I want to talk about is the private versus public lands, and it was mentioned a couple of times by Tanya and Donnie as well. And this graphic is trying to show that relationship as much as possible. So this is more of a real world visualization instead of trying to show you lines on paper. And this was submitted by one of our consultants, so I kindly took that from them. But please note that the property line is located on the home side of the public sidewalk there. So this occurs every location in the city where there's a public sidewalk. So it's always on the property line is always on the outside of the sidewalk to give us that road right away. After that, there's a utility easement located. It's only shown on the left side of the drawing, but it's usually on both sides, and it's usually a lot larger almost. It's the 3.5 meters, but it's on both sides of the road right away, not just the one side, which is shown there. And this allows like our third-party utilities, power, gas, telecommunications to install their services. These third-party utilities are not installed, operated, or maintained by the city, but are allowed to be there through franchise agreements, federal legislation, municipal access agreements, and another rationale and legislative requirements. We do have contacts with these utility groups, but if a resident does have issue with one of them, we suggest they contact them directly, as we have no control over their installations. After saying that, if there are issues on the road right away, we definitely have the requirement to contact the utilities directly. And I'll get on to that further on in the presentation with some of our on-street stuff. Another item to note. Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. I like your hair, by the way.
Thanks.
This graphic, do we like? I mean, does this go out early? Like, where do we put this? I mean, this seems always to cause problems, particularly now. You know, we had to tell us right away going in installing fiber optics. We've had other situations with other utility companies, and of course they go on the other side, and everybody gets quite upset because lots of residents have, like you said, put rock or other landscape features right up to the sidewalk on their home side. And I don't really think a lot of people have that understanding, whether they gloss over it somehow. Is there some way we can continue to reinforce that? Would that make it easier for everybody? It just seems, I mean, actually I had forgotten it until of course we had the whole TELUS fiber optics issue a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be brought up quite often. And I know our corporate communications and corporate strategies have a plan to implement something like this with regards to like either TikTok videos or something to bring it more to the forefront and just explain it a little bit more clearly to the residents. But it's one of those situations that most people don't go looking for this information. They just end up complaining first, and having this kind of on hand is helpful. And that's kind of part of the process or the part of the reasoning of why we wanted to bring it up in this setting as well, is to educate yourselves as well, to make sure that we're all aware of it. And I'm willing to share this image with everyone as well, just to make sure that everyone does understand it. But I don't know a better way to get it out to the public, because most people kind of put blinders onto this stuff until it really affects them.
Yeah, and I mean, such is life, unfortunately. You're absolutely correct. I just think it's something maybe we could start to push out a little bit more, whether it's in the formats you suggested or if it's goes out every year in their assessments or something, so that I mean, at least they can say, or at least we can say,
A lot of questions coming up.
yeah.
Yeah, so to John's point, we have highlighted this to be added, that public versus private property delineation as part of the one-on-one videos that we are creating.
Yeah.
So if we can get the right resources in time, we can definitely add this to the list.
Okay,
Have
great.
videos.
No, that's good. It's a good graphic, and it's a good reminder.
So the 3.5 meters, where's that measured from? From the curb to the 3.5 meters in, or from the sidewalk?
It's from the property line, actually. So the property line sits behind the sidewalk, and then there's a utility easement after that runs in everyone's front yard. And that's where we come with the encroachment issues that Tanya was mentioning earlier and everything. It's where we put in, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but in the last few years, we've created a 4-party trenching system where all of those utilities kind of reside in a trench in that location. And that gives us free and clear access to our sidewalk and our infrastructure, as well as our utilities in the roadway.
Sorry, Tanya, you have some points to make there? I see your hands.
Sorry, I was just going to say the engineering also has a large section on the website about encroachments and explains the difference between utility right-of-ways, things like that. One thing that's really important to note is this is just a graphic, and property lines are not always consistent to a set amount. We have some in the, let's say, forest lawn area of the city which have a 6-inch back of walk, and I've seen some in Braeside where they're 20 feet from the back of the walk before the property line starts. So people have to really look at things like their RPRs and things like that to help them with that, but they're not always consistent. So it's really challenging for to always tell people that you're 2 feet back or something like that.
Yeah, and echoing what Tanya's saying here, this is more for new neighborhoods along with our complete streets guidelines and involving and including those things. So we've kind of tightened things as much as we can and then put it in there, but some of those older neighborhoods and depending on where the utilities are, there can be like the 6 meter kind of or 3 meter dimension off of the back of sidewalk until that property line.
So sorry, I got really.
Yeah, go ahead.
Current engineering standards put our utilities and water and the sewer under the road and not on the sidewalk, right?
Correct, yeah, we
That was
changed
the-
that. Yeah, we changed that recently.
So that's-
Yeah, and I was going to go over that point next as well, because I
Okay.
know it was a question from Councillor Broadhead as well. So
John's got a lot of
We debated
drawing
a lot
slides.
one year and
Yeah, so when did it change?
then-
In the last update, yeah,
3 years ago.
the last update. When did we change it, John, to?
we
From boulevards.
changed it when we removed the community standards. I think it was not a bylaw, but it was a motion. And this was a few years ago. I think it was 3 years ago, and we've just implemented it with our update to the engineering standards. But I know there's questions on why it was done, and I kind of have some major highlights of the rationale behind it. So first, if you notice the boulevards in this drawing here, there's trees there. So in our old standards, we had those utilities running in the boulevards. And if you think about it, if you have to replace a pipe, you're going to have to replace that whole boulevard. So that means taking out all the boulevard trees that are sitting on that roadway, which I don't know if everyone is well aware of, but that's one of the major draws to the city is having these nice boulevard trees everywhere. So in the recent past, we've had to have situations where we abandon the actual existing lines in place and then have to put new lines into the road right away or into the roadway itself, just to avoid having to remove those boulevard trees. So this is something that in the future, we're already seeing it, what happened in the past by having all the utilities in the boulevard. It really becomes a conundrum because we don't want to change the physical landscape too much while dealing with that underground hidden assets, as Michaela had mentioned them. Another thing would be our larger emphasis on asset management and our collaborative approach with the organization. We're aiming to have the utilities and neighborhoods last the same length of time or as much as we can. So if we have to replace a roadway, we're going to want to replace the sewers and everything at the same time. So if we're ending up in a situation, we don't want to end up in a situation, where we replace the road surface and then the next year we have to go and replace all of the utilities underground, because then we're just redoing the road again. And that's just a huge waste of taxpayer dollars. So we want to have this all kind of combined in one go and less impact to the residents as well. Because at the same time, we don't want to have work in the utility or in the boulevards, then have work happening in the roadway at a different time period. It just makes it a little bit more concise and less impactful to the residents. Third, and this one's more for utility groups, is just by maintaining that separation between that trench of the third-party utilities as well as our utilities, it gives us a bit of a more of a clearance and ability not to kind of be impactful to the others and ending up with a situation where we have TELUS lines or a power line or a forest line running over top of our utilities where we have to pay them to relocate those lines temporarily just to put in our infrastructure and then pay them to move it back. It's just a whole bunch of extra wasted costs that we're trying to avoid and trying to save in the long run. So those are kind of some of the three big ones. One of the big detriments, I would say, though, is just that the fact that the road becomes unusable if you're changing out the utilities in the road. But at the same time, we want to aim to be replacing the road at that same time too. So it's kind of you got to go with one way or the other, and we find that this is the more ideal option to try and replace all of that in one go. If there's any sort of minor or emergency kind of repair, you do end up with a narrowing of the travel road or the travel lane, which we can address with our on-street construction permit process as well as traffic accommodation plans. So that's kind of the way we want to try and approach it, to kind of limit the amount of impediments to people's homes or businesses and things like that. Hopefully that explains it a bit better.
This was a huge debate in the book sales in 11 or 12. And it was interesting.
Yeah,
the development industry was trying to change it. And even Tracy Allen was quite supportive of it. She's like, get a better road. And
That's true too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the
was just so worried about ripping up a road versus a sidewalk. That was something. Anyway, that was actually really.
It does end up with a better road because then they core the entire section to pretty much remove all of the existing native material, and then it becomes all engineered backfill. So you end up with less sags in the roads, less undulations, things like that. As long as everything's done properly, it ends up being a better system overall.
How do you coordinate, John? So I mean, one of the biggest issues, maybe it's a falsehood, but it just seems like it's optics. You know, you'll see somebody come in, we'll put the road down, and then 2 weeks later, we come in and tear it up because we got to put in a utility or do something else. So, I mean, how do you coordinate all of that so that that situation isn't happening? Or is that just perception?
We got Dean coming up later to explain about all that
Dean's
asset
fault. Oh,
management
I knew it was Dean's fault.
and how we
It's- yeah, it's a-
coordinate with our utilities, RMR as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And other than
But-
emergencies, you shouldn't see that happen.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Wes, how different administrations. Like if we had
All
that
right.
issue in 2011 or 12, the standards would have been changed back then. Right?
Well, the interesting thing is back then, one of the arguments was the example of Castle Downs. So the utilities were in the middle of the road, but your talk about no undulation certainly flied in the face of the what was happening in Castle Downs. You just drive through there and it was like moguls, and the manhole cover was the highest part of the road, and so
Poor developer.
so I don't know what was it installed incorrectly? The engineer backfill wasn't done right, or how did that play out that way?
I got Faisal's hands up. Maybe Faisal can explain all of that.
Yeah, he was
I-
at least with City of Edmonton, but I can't explain it because I don't
John,
know
actually,
that
I
case.
think I can add, it was built by city forces in the winter. And this changed the processes of how we analyze clay compaction over years. And yeah, it was a big deal. It's not performing well, and it never will, unfortunately, because once you don't address the plasticity of the clay or any of its susceptibility to moisture, you're never going to get out of it. So that was a lesson learned.
Fair enough. I did not know that. That was not explained at the time.
No.
So.
No, nobody will want to tell you that.
Fair enough. Okay. Sorry.
I get, did this come to council? Because engineering standards are not approved by
It's
council.
not approved by council. It got approved and then we are adopted now for all the new developments. Yeah. I think we gave a memo to
I was
council
gonna
that
say
has been
there's an
completed.
advisory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'll touch base on that as well later in the presentation about the standards themselves, very briefly though. Next slide, Donnie. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about public-private differentiation, but this is more with regards to our process and trying to make things a little bit more clear. So we have our donated assets from developers, and these are our road right-of-ways, kind of as shown in that last diagram. With where developers build out the neighborhood, they're required to build the infrastructure needed to access the newly created lots. This could be both residential, commercial, multifamily, institutional. And the city implements some engineering requirements to ensure that the city receives the highest quality and let's say the infrastructure that's donated won't collapse immediately after the warranty period is up. These requirements start with the need to enter into a development agreement or DA. This is also called a servicing agreement in other jurisdictions, just to give some reference if you're unaware. As part of the DA, we review the drawings of what is intended to be installed and compare them with our municipal engineering standards. The engineering standards is our Bible that we work off of, where it has been reviewed and vetted with our internal departments as well as consultants in the industry, including our developers consultants. The document is intended to be a balance of what the city requires long-term, not only for hard infrastructure performance, but also any sort of environmental, landscape, transportation, or any other group's requirements, while also working with developers to ensure the developments are still cost-effective and competitive for St. Albert. Now, as the world is not always perfect, there are some situations that our engineering standards do not apply in every situation and must be deviated from. We have a process internally to deviate from these standards, and it gives the developer an opportunity to design something to work around whatever issue they may be facing. So we're not putting them into a specific box of what's there. We try and work with them to make sure that the neighborhoods are still being able to be built. It also gives us the opportunity to try alternative products in a small scale if we're willing to try it. At the front end, we also ensure there is a security in place in case the developer defaults on their contractual obligations of the DA. I did a presentation for council a few years ago with regards to the implementation of development bonds, which now are an option along with letters of credit and cash. Once the agreement has been executed, construction activities begin on site, and our team is responsible for the daily monitoring of the construction projects to ensure that they are building as per their approved drawings and still meeting our municipal engineering standards. During construction, some items may come up that may affect how the project is completed. In these cases, we allow for red lines to be done with proper reviews from the affected parties to ensure that the red lines are acceptable to the city prior to them moving forward. Once construction is completed, inspections are conducted on the various aspects of the development to ensure that it has been completed to the satisfaction of the city. This is generally called the construction completion certificate process, with the inspection only being a small part of the requirements. To complete their CCC, they must also submit packages that include, but are not limited to, some of the following: as-built drawings, testing results, CCTV camera footage, construction costs. Just for information, CCTV footage is basically, they send camera lines down every single sewer line, storm or sanitary, to ensure there's no misshaping or anything like that of the pipes, to ensure that they're in a good position for us to accept that infrastructure. With this package and the information in it, we can use this to accurately appreciate the introduction of the new assets to the city. By this, I mean turning over those assets to other internal groups, public operations, so on, as well as handling the financial information over to finance as our new tangible capital assets. This transfer was an issue with the financial audit last few years, as it was identified the city was not providing the most optimal information to finance. This issue is a process one, and we did identify it early on, but it just takes time to get this completed. So it was not clearly identified in the old engineering standards on what was required to be submitted to the city and how it was being used as an internal process. This was given possibly inaccurate information, and it was not verified by a third party. We corrected this with our update to the municipal engineering standards last year. However, the change isn't immediate, as the new agreements are usually signed per year and done within that same construction period. So any of those agreements that were signed late last year or last year and all would not have been required to fulfill the obligations as part of that with the engineering standards. We can ask nicely, but there were some issues with the documentation as well. So it was too late on those ones, but for the ones that are done this year, we should have that corrected and will be properly completed as per the requirements from that financial audit. As part of the CCC process, once they've completed that CCC, we also release half of the security being held for that specific item. And the reason is because we don't actually complete or inspect all the items over the same time. So just to give a frame of reference, one DA or development agreement can last probably around 5 years from signing to construction completion, with the final touches of landscape warranty and things like that. So once the inspection has been completed, their installations enter into a warranty period based off the requirements stipulated in DA. Once the warranty period has been completed, another inspection is done, and then a final acceptance certificate is applied for the requirements, with requirements similar to the CCC needing to be submitted before approval is given, and the developer is released from their obligations of the remainder of the security is returned. This is the time that the DA has completed its course, and the assets have been, or all the assets have been turned over to the city for full operation and maintenance from then on. Next slide.
I would just pause and say if any questions, because John's got a ton of drawings. Quick review coming up from the next few slides there. Any questions so far on the CCC, FACs, process, DAs?
Just a follow-up question, John, and I apologize, maybe I heard it wrong or I just don't want to have. So when we do the CCC, the final inspections, so when, I mean, that occurs right at, like, when in the process, so they do sign off and then they finish their work, or their work is completed and then we sign it up?
Their work is completed, and then in our actual DA, it says they must submit XYZ, all the documentation within 6 months of that inspection date. to obtain their CCC. So we usually keep the inspection date, or we call it the clean date of inspection, for when the CCC is backdated or signed for, just to make sure that they've completed all of the requirements of that CCC. So if any of the documentation they submit is not up to our standards or our requirements, then they do not obtain that CCC until they've rectified those issues. And it might be a delay on their CCC or other things as well.
So, I mean, typically, how many CCCs and that whole process do you have going at one time in your office?
So on average, I'm going to say average from, let's say 2000, I think I did the metrics from 2008 all the way until 2020 was about 8 DAs a year. In 2021, we had 19 that we had to do. And then I think we're on the list for about 15 this year right now. So we definitely had an influx of work last year as well as this year to deal with.
And that's, so, I mean, you have how many people in there doing that review?
So there's 5 of us in total right
Okay,
now.
thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And like I said, there's a different CCC for each individual item. So like underground and surface, that would be like the utilities underground will have its own, as well as the surface will have its own, as well as separate walks and landscaping. They all have their each individual CCCs that need to be completed.
Councillor Hughes has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So not about the CCCs, but the top part of this slide. So you mentioned that there's an opportunity to do, or I can't remember the word was, experimental or something like this, different options for infrastructure. And I'm wondering, when we do that, if we're doing something that's not tried and true, are we getting warranties from the companies that we're doing the experimental type of repairs on?
I'll be clear with you, we haven't really allowed this in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're not even, like, we have the option available, but no one's brought up enough of a case to actually implement it or move forward on. If someone were to give that warranty or something of that nature, then I'm sure we would have that option, but it's also a conversation of maintenance and things like that. So we have to involve all groups. And there are some items that would be ideal from an environmental perspective, let's say, but also a nightmare from the public operations side of things and the dealing with that maintenance over time. So we do have to balance those pros and cons, and some things just aren't built for our kind of our weather. Even though we would like to have it, a lot of things are designed, let's say, for California, and they're not built for our winters. So we do have to balance those things, but we do have those options available, and we do have the conversations from time to time. But a lot of the time, developers and everyone just want to use status quo because it is tried and true and tested, and it's a benefit to their community as well, because they have a reputational disadvantage if all of a sudden they installed a very green infrastructure and then in 3 years it all fell apart. Then they're going to have a lot of people having issues with them as well. So it's a balance that we're all looking for, to trying to give the most optimal solution.
I guess, just to rephrase it, I guess in the event that you were to consider something that's not tried and true, would you have a requirement that there was an extensive warranty process?
We could write that into the development agreement, I would have to say. Like, it would have to be agreed upon and legally put in beforehand before we accept anything like that.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Councillor Hughes, we always get new products to be tried on cities, sidewalks and anything, right? All the time we get that request. We don't have a formal process per se to address those, but what we have seen is we touch base with our departments. Is there any particular case study that we can do, applying in a small portion, see how it performs over a few years, and then get that feedback and then incorporate that into the standard in the future? So that's something that we have talked about internally, but definitely a process that we need to develop.
And to add on to that, a lot of the times we're not the first guinea pig. Usually they take it to a city of Edmonton or someone larger first, and we piggyback off of whatever their knowledge is, just because they do have a little bit more manpower and expertise to review some of these things. We do take that into account. So let's say if a different type of pipe system wants to be used, or type of pipe, then we definitely take in all of the information from that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, John. You have to fly through the next few slides.
I will try and fly through real quick. There's a lot of drawings on this next one, and the rationale is I wanted to show everyone exactly all the stuff that we do review in a drawing package for one of these development agreements. So Donnie can flip through real quick here, and I'll try and list off some of the things we look at. So all these drawings, and Donnie, go ahead and flip through if you want. All these drawings are to be completed and submitted to the city by professional engineers and an ALAA certified landscape architect for landscaping drawings. And they all must meet our municipal engineering standards. So this includes legal plans, underground utility plans, roads, grading plans, sidewalks, third-party utilities, landscaping, and just rifle through these, Donnie, as quick as you want. But there's a lot of detail that we have to really ask for in these. If you can see the notes on the side of the page, that's all requirements we have. We also have things like erosion and sedimentation control requirements, and we have to coordinate with all of these different groups. And as Donnie's cycling through, you'll see an ACO gas one come up, as well as a Fortis drawing or a DES engineering drawing come up. And we have to coordinate these things with our landscaping reviews as well to make sure that there's no conflicts with fire hydrants, street lights, trees, all of those things have to be reviewed upon. So I just want to give you the confidence that we are taking the time to make sure that what's being installed is quite adequate and above and beyond what should be that you would want even at your own home. So we're going to quite a level of detail to make sure that everything is done right.
This is a sample from Jensen Lake, and you can see the pond there, right? So
It's like when we got all the coloring books, you know, you just go.
Yeah. So those are some of the lines that John mentioned, the utility lines,
Yeah, no.
sidewalks.
I mean, I think, you know, just a general observation as you scroll through these, I mean, I guess, you know, the level of detail, as you just said, John, gives not only council, but the residents assurances that, you know, these things are happening, that we're not doing it on the back of the napkin, like you see from some social media people saying, well, what were they thinking? We know exactly what we were thinking.
Yeah, and sometimes there are conflicts that just can't be worked around, but usually we try and plan ahead for all of these reviews and make sure it's done to the best engineering capabilities possible, and just taking what's planning and side is done and go from there. So now I want to give you guys a little view of construction in general that happens and what we review from a day-to-day kind of operations, just because I know not everyone gets the joy of being able to go on site and seeing the construction actually take place. So Donnie, you can move through these pretty quick as well, but it's just the same neighborhood that I took I took some of these photos from. So this is basically a deep service, either storm or sanitary, and building up and backfilling and the amount of work that goes on from there. So as you can see, they're adding more concrete cylinders or on top of everything as they're backfilling and getting to surface. And what starts off as a giant dirt bowl keeps going and gets built up. And Donnie, if you want to keep going. And
That's a
our pipe
manhole.
connections, our manholes, and making sure that what we tie into those manholes is completely sealed so that there's no leaks. You can see the grouting on the exterior, which is something that not every community does, but we still require it. And as you go up, you can see basically it gets smaller to actually get to what we see in the end of the day is just like a little catch basin or a manhole that gets incorporated into a curb. And
This would be storm, John?
This will
yeah,
be
this would be a storm situation. Yeah.
and that's all you see at the top, right? And
Yeah.
all the work goes behind.
So this is all you see with all that work that was done underground, and you only end up seeing this. So like Michaela said, once you put it in, you forget about it, and it's quite important. So this is kind of what the boulevards look like after the fact. So you got your curb gutter, sidewalk, but it doesn't have the landscaping done yet at this time because it was not done when last season when I took these photos, or not me taking the photos, but my team took the photos.
I mean, this is a little off the cuff question, and I apologize for talking, but I mean, what's our deepest service right now, and in which area? Like, I mean, I think the main in my neighborhood, I think it's like 30 meters deep. I heard like the main. Like, what's the deepest, or was that just I just made that number up? Do you know what?
That neighborhood, I think they went down 10 meters deep for their super deep services, but it's just for a giant main, and then they have service lines that are shallower from that. So usually water sits at about 3 meters, and your storm and sanitary are kind of in that range as well, because that's basically where below the frost line, so nothing can really freeze underground at that point. So that's where the depth of everything sits.
Sanitary is always below the water.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, sanitary will always just flow, like, I mean, you don't need a whole big pipe. It'll flow along the channel. But you're right, you don't want to mix it with.
Mix it up, yeah, in case there's a.
Yeah, you don't want it to leak and
Yeah.
end up migrating into the storm and then having an environmental release or into the water supply or anything like that. So we do make sure things like that are kind of controlled. So that's kind of what happens in the public's road right away. Sorry?
Go ahead, yeah.
So let's talk about the lots that we saw in the design drawings that are more on the private side. So you notice there's many residential lots, but there's also non-residential that we saw as well. This process quite similar to the process for what we received from the developers, but we have a little less control on what a person can do on their private site versus what we control in the road right away, as well as timing for it. So in terms of development permits for commercial, industrial, multifamily, institutional, we request engineer design drawings to ensure the installations are being completed in a fashion that does not negatively affect our municipal system. What this means is that we're looking at things like how the water system is connected and is it, let's say, looped based on the side of the site. So looping is when there's not just one connection to the city main, but more than one, so that the system has an issue. It's not really completely cut off from the water supply. So think of a large commercial site like St. Albert Trail, like where the Browns and the movie theater is and all that. Let's say there was an accidental water line break right outside the theater, and the whole development was on a single connection. Then that entire site would need the water to be shut down while the repair is going on. This would not be a good thing to happen for anyone from anyone's point of view, residents or business owners. So we'll also look at things like making sure the storm water is coming off the site that won't overload our pipes downstream, so there's no surges in neighborhoods closer to the river, which will be more critical. And as time goes on, as we're facing kind of more storm events with climate change and things like that. Once the drawings have been reviewed and approved by reviewed by the city once again takes a security on the site. Security is far less for what was taken on a DA, but is necessary in case the developer defaults and the city needs to go into an immediate situation to rectify some potential major concern to the city's network. Just like a DA, we go for site inspections, but as they're not our infrastructure at the end of the day, we have less time spent on these sites, and we're there usually once a week and for any sort of major tie-ins that occur. So something like a hot tap. And just a side note, a hot tap is when a contractor is tying into an active city water main, connecting to it as it's live in order to not affect any of the adjacent residents or businesses, which is really interesting to see. As the work is being completed on private lot and we have no warranty on the infrastructure, that would be between really the private owner and the builder. We issue only a final CCC, which we call it, after our inspection is completed and release all of their security amounts as we have been satisfied with the work that has been completed. For residential, the requirements is less than what it is for that, where it's a more simple situation, and we check for the tie-ins the developer install or the builder installs onto the developer installed service lines that were mentioned earlier. And make sure that none of the city lines have been damaged. Then we also check the rough grade on the site to ensure it matches with the overall engineering design. I think Tanya mentioned that as well. We check the rough grade there to make sure it matches that design for the neighborhood so that we don't run into any issues where there might be a conflict with our surface drainage bylaw. We also check for proper grading away from the homes and the quality of work as well to a limited degree to try and make sure that homeowners in the long run are avoiding some of those major settlements that have happened around people's homes, around that foundation. We know that happens all the time, so we try and look to make sure it's been backfilled properly to the best as we can see from a visual inspection. Unlike other cities, we do not do a final grade review after the landscape has been installed, and that's mostly just a kind of capacity issue and timing, as well as it's not affecting the overall drainage and so on and so forth. All right, next slide. And this is just going through one of our this is actually kind of an institutional one, but this is the level of drawing review that we do on a private development permit site. So just rifle through it. It kind of includes some of the same stuff, the grading and the underground services, but it's definitely not to the same degree as what we receive in a development agreement. And it's a lot shorter. Okay, now I've mentioned third-party utilities quite a bit in this presentation. Sorry?
Sorry.
I just saw noise exemption permits, we're gonna start talking about that.
Sure.
Okay, so I've mentioned third-party utilities quite a bit in this presentation, so it makes sense that we look after those ones as well, but for only public lands. What happens on private lands is between a utility provider and that private resident. The city should not be involved with any issues between those two private entities. As the installation of third-party utilities are allowed by franchise agreements, federal legislation, municipal access agreements, etc., we have only so much control on what can happen, and thus really try to work with them to ensure public safety during their installations. This is done by having them obtain an OSCP for their work, on-street construction permit. This is basically the document that we can share with the rest of the groups from the city to notify them that something is occurring and may affect them. This could include bylaw for any bylaw infraction complaints, fire services for any route deviations in case of emergency, transit for any of their route deviations, etc., based on whatever the scope of that work is. We request an OSCP for all construction projects that involve the road right away, as it's a way to see what's occurring in the city and for us to go back in case something does happen a year or two later, or in case there may be other concerns. It's a free service and residents should be applying for them as well if they're doing any work. Like let's say they're replacing their driveway or apron, they can come in, get this permit, and we can look at their plan and help them out as well as notified and have them put up any sort of signage as, if necessary. Depending on the scope and if there are impacts to the road traffic, we request a traffic accommodation plan or TAP to be included and reviewed as well. This can be used to ensure the public safety along with the safety of the contractor doing the work too. Then next slide is just a sample TAP. Basically ensuring that whatever they do, if they have to shut a lane down, that it's done properly and the proper signage is in place and moving forward from there.
TAP is traffic.
Yeah. And then lastly, last slide. I want to mention some of the things that we work on to help maintain St. Albert as one of the best communities. Our municipal engineering standards are first and foremost in this, where we can control what is being built in the city and the expected lifespans of the infrastructure. This really works well with our asset management group, as we can work to have any replacements being completed at the same time, as I've mentioned earlier, and limit any costs to the city. This is also a document where we can be at the forefront of any sort of environmental concerns and issues like changes that are coming with regards to the stormwater management as it relates to climate change. And we can assist in developing and updating city bylaws and policies and procedures while also working with all groups. As a group ourselves, we've also set up groups with surrounding municipalities to help discuss the regions related development engineering concerns and have built quite a good network because I don't know if you guys hear this as well, but usually a developer will come complain and say, well, this city lets us do this. Why won't you let us do this? And we can have that direct conversation with the other municipalities to understand what they allow and what they don't. And most of the times it's proven to be not true. So a lot of them try and play us off each other. And so we get that short-term conversation we can do to avoid that in the future. But yeah, this is development engineering in a nutshell. And let me know if you guys have any more questions.
I guess just from a green tape reduction and all that, I mean, I'm sure you've gone through all your processes and whatever. Like, I mean, I'm not sure if you have targets that you try to achieve in relation to doing that once you get, I mean, I imagine it's all tied into when you get all of the final documentation from whoever. But do you guys have, like, do you guys actually try and target a certain amount of time to have everything back to the developer or the applicant?
Yes, we use 4 weeks time frame. That's typically what we follow, 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But usually what happens is the drawings are not complete when they get submitted. So there's a few back and forth that happens and then it gets extended, right? So John, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, like our mandate in the requirements is 4 to 6 weeks, and really we usually hit it in 3 weeks, depending on what the level of complexity and the level of completeness of the drawings that are submitted to us. But we also try and ensure our timing is more when we have it in our hands, and not just the overall process takes 4 to 6 weeks, because there have been times when we've reviewed a set of drawings within 2 weeks, got it back to the developer, and they sat on it for 6 months. So that's kind of a little unfair for us if we try and make our 4 to 6 week kind of duration, and we've only seen them for 2 weeks. So.
Okay, thanks.
John, what's the process for changing engineering standards? For example, St. Albert doesn't allow power in the sky anymore. It's all buried. But now, what's this? How do you change a standard, for example, to ensure that new developments has fiber to every lot? Or how would you change it to ensure that every lot had 200 amp service? To allow for-
I knew that. I knew this question would kind of come up, but like I said before, the third-party utilities isn't really something that we have direct control over. I know we want to enforce and require them to put like a 200 amp service in. I have to touch base with my Fortis friends because I know there was a review kind of with the utility commission on basically whether or not the municipality is allowed to dictate that to them and move forward with it. And Adrian can back me up on this one. I think we've had this conversation many a times, but we don't really require anything from that point of view. But for the actual process of updating the engineering standards, if we did want to include that, then we have an internal process where we bring it up internally, review it, comment on it, and then we send it out for review with our development industry as well to get their input. And then bring it back and make the changes depending on whatever the communications are back and forth, as well as the external parties have the opportunity to make requests for changes as well. So they can make a request for change. Then we will review that internally as well and then send it back to the development group or UDI and review that from their end and come to a consensus on what that change should be. And there's no guarantee that a change would occur, but that's kind of where the process is.
Thank you.
And I think that's where where development industry couldn't get the pipes under the road through staff, so they came to council. And so that's another.
But aren't you at kind of the whim of the utility companies? Like, I mean, if TELUS doesn't have or Shaw doesn't have the capacity to install optics, you're kind of like a little hard to mandate them to have it.
And I think our standard calls for
We require the
conduits.
conduit. The new subdivisions are supposed to have the conduit if they don't put the fiber.
Okay,
Jonathan-
so I see, you prepare.
Yeah, so what we've gone towards is the 4-party trenching method. So I don't have one kind of readily available, but it would have been one of the drawings would have had it. But it basically indicates that gas sits at a certain level, and then you get your power at a certain level or elevation, and then your telecoms from there. But there's open conduits and extra conduits for that, and it's all installed on the developer's dime for that, and that's to go in all new neighborhoods, and basically a way to give open access to any sort of other future requirements they may need to come.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Are you wanting to do 200 amps every house? Is that why you asked?
Well, who knows what I might buy in the future, right?
So
But be able to charge my car or
yes,
your pacemaker or my pacemaker.
we've talked about that a lot internally because the building department has seen like just an escalation in the number of retrofits for increased service to their homes. A lot of people at home with COVID added hot tubs and air conditioning units.
Yeah, great.
And that adds a lot of draw. And, you know, when these houses have 110 service, it's not enough. And so what we were seeing was, it depends on which developer you talk to and where it is. But if you run 4-aught line, is that what it is, John?
Yeah, because standard is 1-aught.
Yeah. If they run the heavier line that can do the 220 service, they end up with, it's an increment of maybe it's $900 to a new home or maybe a couple thousand to a new home. But when people come in and have to retrofit, it's between $12,000 and $30,000 to these retrofits. And they're tearing up boulevards and sidewalks and driveways and stuff like that. So we've had a lot of talks, but we kind of hit a bit of a dead end there with the Alberta Energy Regulator, and they're trying to figure out whether we can even enforce that or not. I know that, you know, the energy companies would prefer that we would enforce it and just require everything to be the 200 amp compatible service. So they at least have the panels or the wire to the home is the big thing, and then they can upgrade their panels as they need. We're in a holding pattern on that right now.
I see no more questions, John. Thank you. We'll move on to capital projects next. And anytime if you have further questions, you know, we are here. No worries. This is great. Take away, Tim. You're not
He's muted.
coming through speaker, you're muted maybe? No.
Hear me now?
There we
Yeah,
go.
there you
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Usual suspect here with this microphone. So good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Saunders. I'm the manager of the Capital Projects Office through Engineering Services with the City of St. Albert. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the roles, responsibilities, and activities of the Capital Projects Office, or CPO. So with the City of St. Albert, the CPO Office delivers 90% of the capital projects within the organization. We are embedded within the Engineering Services Department, and as you can see, we interact with all city asset groups in terms of delivering the projects each group has sponsored. Finally, similar to development engineering, CPO also completes the asset inventory, and the TCA reporting occurs to move the recognized new refurbished assets into the asset management turning pot. So I will spend some time today providing a brief synopsis of the processes involved in project management. Throughout, I will make reference to the specific activities that members of the CPO office complete during project delivery. Donnie has provided an overview of the team's makeup, but in general, the CPO team consists of technical and administrative professionals responsible for the delivery of capital projects to ensure best value for the City of St. Albert. The diverse experience, skills, and knowledge allow the team to effectively tackle the wide range of projects completed by the city. Next slide. So to begin our discussion, I'll lay the groundwork for project management by providing the definitions for a couple of key concepts. The first being, what is a project? So a project is defined as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. The temporary nature of projects indicate a beginning and an end to the project work or a phase of the project work. And what is project management? Project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. Project management refers to guiding project work to deliver the intended outcomes. These definitions are provided within the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide, which is a leading publication administered by the Project Management Institute. The Project Management Institute, or PMI, is a not-for-profit association of project management professionals. It is globally known as the leader in development and oversight of project management practice. The Pmbok Guide is a document that represents good practice for most projects most of the time. Now, while that may seem like a very qualified statement, project management requires a project manager that can decipher each project based on its own merits and unique characteristics and requirements. The guide was created to help a project manager tailor what is needed for projects and is a collection of processes, best practices, terminologies, guidelines in an effort to standardize project management. And with City Council Policy, Capital Project Management CP&E-02, it outlines the requirement for the city to use project management processes and the body of knowledge in delivery of projects. So a general overview of the project management guide is there are 5 process groups which we'll talk about, which is initiation, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closeout of the project. There's 10 knowledge areas and 49 processes. So if you want to go to the next slide. A project management office is the organizational body or entity assigned various responsibilities related to the centralized and coordinated management of those projects under its domain. At the City of St. Albert, we are the CPO. The CPO is responsible for planning, budgeting, and managing major capital projects from the initial concept phase through the design and construction to the end of the project. Projects include new construction and major renovations to the city's roadways, utilities, buildings, and recs, parks, and facilities. We ensure that all capital projects are thoroughly planned and executed, leading to successful project outcomes. In addition, the CPO office participates in short and long-term strategic planning, budgeting, cost estimating, tendering, and construction strategies, project implementation, and monitoring and completing the project. We endeavor to provide project management to internal departments to the scope and budget that we are provided. And the next slide. So, as I had mentioned, there are 5 process groups: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and closeout. It's important to understand that this graphic is not to be misinterpreted as a linear project life cycle, and the next slide will provide some further appreciation. These process groups coexist with one another, dependent on the delivery of the project. The successful integration of the process groups for each project is essential to achieving the most effective delivery of project goals. As an example, a multi-year project using an alternative project delivery method, such as IPD, which is integrated project delivery, has the potential to having all 5 process groups being completed concurrently with as different phases of the project are achieved. But in general, all projects will start or have an initiation. This will lead into planning, of which its importance cannot be understated. Examination and determination of the project scope, initial stakeholder engagement often start near concurrent to project initiation. Similarly, certain forms of project delivery will also have execution tasks starting quite early. As a project is being executed, it is imperative that planning continues for next phases or stages of the project. The overarching process group of monitoring and control is continual. Whether it's costs, schedules, quality management, staying on top of the progression of a project allows the project manager to be nimble and proactive dealing with project constraints. And eventually tasks under the project closeout process group are initiated. And this is when this process group ensures that a project is properly completed, documented, and eventually closed out. The next slide shows levels of effort as they occur through the life of a project. So initiations to start, the effort through initiation ramps up quickly to get a project on its feet. This leads into planning, begins early, but carries on through the life of a project. Once that base plan has been established, the execution process group starts. As an example, this may be commencing the procurement of contracts and/or material. And as mentioned previously, monitoring and control occur throughout the life of a project, ensuring that goals and objectives of the project are being adhered to. The closeout is the final chapter where the project is completed with appropriate documentation. Now within the first, I'll take us through the 5 process groups. With initiation, we have 2 knowledge areas that are supported: project integration management and project stakeholder management. Our projects start with a project charter. This is created by different stakeholder groups within the city when they have a need for new, improvement, repair, or maintenance of a service or structure within the city. These are vetted through the Capital Prioritization Committee and executive leadership team, who determine which projects align with the priorities of council and are put forward for deliberations during the budgeting process. Project charters include the name, project, scope, budget, the stakeholders, both internally and externally, timelines, and the sponsor department within the city. During charter development, the Cpo Office supports the project sponsor by collaborating on scope definition, cost estimates, scheduling implications. Expertise from previously completed projects, construction challenges, and current market trends are provided during this phase. And it's in this process group that the initial stakeholders are identified. In the city, internal, we have council, administration, and personnel from various departments, including community services, emergency services, other engineering branches, financial services and IT, human resources, safety and environment, planning and development, public operations, recs and parks, strategic services and communication. It's a far-reaching, there could be internal stakeholders all over. External, mainly the City of St. Albert residents. We've also got federal, provincial, municipal regulatory agencies, businesses, community groups, and developers. Next slide. So now move into the planning process. This group touches on all 10 knowledge areas of project management. As previously mentioned, and it goes without saying, thorough planning of a project is essential to its project delivery. Project integration management, this is really where the overall project plan is centralized from the identified and required plans. We gather inputs from the City of St. Albert Charter, but also deal with and work with the sponsor to make sure that that scope is well defined. It outlines the project background, provides milestone schedules for the project, lists the stakeholders and contact information. The project budget and any additional funds from outside sources are identified. There's a communication plan for the project, and the list of project tasks and assignments are provided. The plan is reviewed and signed off by the project team as well as managers of each department involved. So additional knowledge areas that occur through the planning stage are the project scope management, project schedule management, project cost management, quality management, resource management, communication management, and risk management, which is also a major factor that needs to be considered in all projects. Also, procurement management and stakeholder management. On to the next slide. The execution process group is where the work actually occurs, and we start to see the delivery of the project. And this is where the project manager will manage the project information, quality, resources, implement the risk mitigation procurement strategies, and continued stakeholder engagement. There are 10 knowledge areas that are supported with this process group. And this is where, like I mentioned, the project construction occurs. In certain process, the project itself may be the design of a future project. So it's interesting how you can consider different phases of a project are occurring during the execution stage. And the next slide. Project management process group of monitoring and controlling. This is really the reporting, the cost control, the monitoring of safety and environmental constraints and plans of the contractor, managing scope, continually control and manage the project changes. That involves continual scope referral and control. Like I mentioned, reporting costs, and controlling quality, and ensuring that the schedule so that projects are completed on time. As well, the communication and reporting to the various internal and external stakeholders. And project closeout. So once the project has been, your deliverable has been achieved, it's often easy to put the project aside and move on to the next one, but it's very important that we do a proper closeout. This is where the project is finalized, record and as-built drawings are submitted, budget is finalized and reported on, O&M manuals are submitted, and one of the most important aspects is creating a lessons learned log. So the next time we have a similar project, it is not reinventing the wheel. We're able to learn on the experiences of previous projects. Now I'll move into some of the achievements of the CPO office. In 2021, the budget was 81.6 million, and that included municipal growth of 36 million, RMR of 26, utility growth at 0.5 million, and utility RMR of 19.1 million. And the next slide shows a couple of the major achievements throughout the year. Was the Fowler Track rehabilitation, intersection improvements at Boudreaux Belrose Drive, the North Interceptor Sanitary Trunk Extension and Community Amenities Site Servicing, Service Place improvements, and Ray Gibbon Drive improvements also occurred in 2021 and started in 2021. The next slide is a
Sorry, Tim, those would all be, except for maybe service, would all be municipal growth projects?
I'm sorry, I was unable to hear.
With like, Fowler was
RMR, yeah.
Service was RMR.
Drove Belrose Drive was RMR. Yeah, Ray Gibbon Drive is growth. So it's a mixture, everything goes to
36
CPO.
million, it was, I think on the previous slides, at 36 million in growth projects.
That was the approved.
Probably.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was
okay.
part of it too. Yeah.
It's a big number. I'm like, what did we go?
Mhm. And also the North Interceptor one was a big one too, but it was partly funded from offset levy reimbursement.
And a lot of grants for these projects too.
Yeah, okay. By the way, Fowler Track. Sorry, Tim, to interrupt.
No problem at all. So I've embedded a video in here. A little bit of background. This was completed last year, 2021.
was one of the phase one that we have
So
completed,
do we do those
paid off.
videos in-house?
No, external consultant.
That was my fucking.
Michael Haney did
Okay, 'cause
that.
We have a drone.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, but why don't we just buy the drone ourselves?
Well, it's part of the contract.
Well, we can save, and if we can do it in-house, absolutely, we can do it as well.
We,
I guess I honestly think they're great, and people like watching them, like the regular drive home with watching
Yeah,
the bridge, you
it's
can't see it.
Yeah, it's something we are exploring as a CPO office, is being able to achieve these in-house, because they are extremely valuable. At the early stage of a process, some of this aerial footage is invaluable with the planning of a project, as well as showcasing the work as it occurs. There are, special licenses and the like that operators will have to obtain, but I think definitely we're able to, get more bang for our buck if we're looking to do these internal over time.
Yeah, we can just do them more frequently, I think.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that was, yeah, that was the only point I was gonna point to. I mean, it's maybe squirrel, but, when we have these, we don't tend to update our website. And people say, well, what's happening? And then they go onto our website and it's.
Sorry.
We did talk about communication management, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
huge.
And I don't know whether that comes out of your office or part of your office or part of, Paul's office, but it's just one of those constant questions we get when we go looking on our website and we have a great initial identification of the project, but the last time it was updated was fall of 2021. And what's happening in spring of 2022, that type of thing.
Tim has got
Yeah.
us on the update and he's taken it to the next level this year. So we'll see. It's work in progress.
All right, maybe
Yeah, I do have one slide where I'll talk a little bit more about our construction map. This next slide is showing the Everett Drive North and Ebony Way traffic circle. So, these are projects that this office has completed in recent years, and more are underway now. And I think this type of aerial footage, it goes a long way to showcasing the work that we do. And, I agree. I think the more that we can publish some of the positive and showcase projects that we've got, we'll get better buy-in with the stakeholders.
Tim, I don't want to short circuit your presentation here. I was going to wait until the end. But my question is that one of the frustrations when a borrowing bylaw comes to council is that we deal with initial sort of estimates at 50%, for example, completion. If you went back to that effort chart where they were overlapping and you had initiation, planning, execution, when do you need the money, or when do you need to know the money? Because we come and the project is 26 million plus or minus 50%. And the community says, well, holy crap, can't we know something better or closer to the final number than that? Can you maybe talk about that for a second?
Sure. Yeah, no, I definitely can. It's highly dependent on the level of knowledge known at the time of project charter development. We've got a wide array of projects, transportation, utilities. So when a project has little to no knowledge of what the final outcome will be, if we have a need for something, there are, industry standard classifications of estimates that are used. Now, within the city of St. Albert, we have defined 3 classes of estimate, one being the conceptual stage with a plus or minus 50% contingency. As we get into detailed design, that brings it down back into 25%. And then when you get to the construction phase, it's on the order of a construction contingency of 10%. Now, one of our strategies is to refine that estimate as we get further along in the project. So, there are analogous projects that have been completed in past years, and that's fairly representative on the transportation side, where we don't know what we're going to uncover necessarily. That's part of the preliminary engineering, but we're going to know order of magnitude. Now, I will qualify that is that globally, we're no different than the rest of North America, is experiencing extreme volatility in pricing right now. We've been working with the sponsor departments, at length to refine their estimates for upcoming budget approvals. Global instability, it's related to material source costs, supply chain uncertainty, There's labor force shortages. So all the stars seem to be aligning in a negative manner right now. So what we're doing is we're taking a hard look at what projects need to be completed now. And if it needs to be completed, we're going to be nimble as a city on how we deliver these projects. We've also got a city council policy for alternative capital financing that gives us latitude with the approval of council that we can take at a project and not necessarily have to go with a design bid build process. Now, that's the traditional method of project delivery where a project is designed, it goes out to tender, open competition, and then it's awarded. Now, right now, that type of project delivery is putting a lot of uncertainty and priced risk into contractors' hands. And the fear being is that they are going to, really amplify this risk cost that may or may not transpire through the course of a project. And if it does transpire, fine. If it doesn't transpire, we need to find a methodology where we get this rebate. So there's alternate project delivery methods where we bring contractors on early contractor involvement. And that's where we're looking, and we are doing a couple of projects right now with construction management at risk. And IPD is another strategy where we get contractor and consultant at the table very early through a competitive bid process, but we bring them on early to build the project properly right from the get-go. Now, not saying that design bid build is never going to have a place, but for us to try to take that risk away from a contractor and only pay market value, but nothing more is really the strategy. So long story short, I think based on the different levels of knowledge, that's where the estimate will become tighter and tighter and tighter. And we as a city will have the flexibility as a project goes on to release those funds, and reallocate them to other projects where they're maybe needed. So conceptual stage, bring it as tight as you can with the plus or minus 50%. Or if you do have more information, bring that down. It's about real estimating. That's what it is all about.
Just a quick follow on, and then before I lose this train of thought. What would you say to a resident that says, well, the city, they don't manage scope creep, and if they got $40 million, it's going to be $40 million no matter what. How do you manage scope creep throughout a project like that?
So the CPO is bound by the purchasing directive, and in there, that gives the bounds for managing scope. So change orders are one thing. There may be design changes that have to be accounted for, and we've got levels of authority that can approve that. But change in scope is something completely different. That's where we as a CPO will manage that. We're, say, like a police department for the different departments within the city, but to make sure that our projects are delivered properly, and scope creep cannot occur. And if there is a change in scope, that we follow the processes, which ultimately at a certain level go back to council for approval.
Yeah, that's the procurement policy right now. Any scope addition has to come back to council for approval. Incidental scope, like on-site condition that we encounter, that's considered as within the scope, and it's a change order. So those are some of the contingencies that we have to manage within the risk.
So there's contingencies.
Correct.
To cover off sort of incidental change orders.
Yes.
But an actual scope change of the project has to come
Back to council, absolutely, yeah.
And that's where it's important that at the time of charter development and approval, that the scope is defined enough so that we are able to ensure that that scope does not creep, that it doesn't bring everything under the sun in. So that's where this office works with the sponsor groups to make sure that that development is tight enough, that that scope is defined well enough so that the project can be carried out.
Fair enough, thanks. Sorry, Dan.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to address a little bit because you started talking about the borrowing bylaw in terms of the the cost of the project and stuff like that. So we do we can look at other options and not. So part of the issue why we've always wanted to bring the borrowing bylaw forward right away at the initial charter is to know that we have council and community support and the money available to do the project. Another way we could look at it is that we could start funding design work through another mechanism, right? So whether it's we're using our capital reserve to fund it, even temporarily. I think we did that with the fire hall. We needed to advance the purchase of the land before the borrowing bylaw was signed off. So we assigned money from the capital reserve to do that. So we could do that with the project, do the design work till we get a tighter cost before we actually bring the borrowing bylaw forward. The risk of that is, of course, is that if for some reason the borrowing bylaw was not supported, you have that the cap, if we originally funded it from capital, those are now sunk costs if we can't move ahead with the project. So there's risks on both sides, but understanding, like you said, it's hard when you're trying to come up with a borrowing bylaw and your costing is at plus or minus 50%. You could end up having to do a borrowing bylaw because it comes in higher once the design. So that's something we can look at certainly on bigger projects. Maybe it makes sense to do some of the design work first so that we can tighten up what we think the project's actually going to cost.
Especially if you have confidence that council's going to approve the bylaw, right? Like, if it's a project that we support. Yeah.
I mean, the only risk is that on a borrowing bylaw, the community has the ability to petition. So you can't say the council can.
That's a small risk. I would say that's a very small risk.
It is very small. It's a pretty high bar to reach. Yeah. In order for a petition to be.
Council supporting the problem. You never know.
For me, it's about being able to explain to residents when they come to be our process and why. And then to your point, Tim, how we manage the scope of a particular project. Because I can tell you how many times I've heard, well, if you borrow $40 million, the city will just spend it. And I know that's not right, but that's the impression that's out there. And I'm not sure where that impression comes from, but.
Remind them about project number 9.
I would,
That was a
and I
$40 million,
do, it's, but you know what? People say what they, it comes from somewhere inside, and so.
I don't think they're ever gonna change that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
maybe
no
so.
different than you say, well, if you're gonna, anything that the government buys, I mean, if it's a
$400 hammer?
yeah, $400 hammer or a $50 screw or bolt.
I was just going to call it a bio break for 10 minutes
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we haven't had it
So I
for,
was gonna say, everybody
Tim, if this is something that we can pause and then come back at,
Don't leave this past the
12:30?
picture because I have a question about roundabouts, but we'll do that in 10 minutes.
so 10 minutes.
This actually looks like a teardrop, not a roundabout. It actually looks.
The mill's round.
Yeah.
And I may wait till Dean gets here, but go ahead and eat.
So 12:30 we'll come back. Is that okay?
Yeah, 12:30.
Okay.
9 minutes, everyone. I don't have a half an hour left. So my question was, and I'll wait till Dean gets here if you want, but how do we put into our engineering standards to put something in the middle of the roundabout?
Oh, like a flower or something? Or culture?
Anything.
Or a traffic cop.
For the aesthetic reasons and for the safety, to try to force people to not go straight through and to slow down and turn left or look left.
Okay.
Because there's the one over by the Legion and the seniors that's just ugly. And I don't know if there's anything in this one now.
I don't see anything
I
there.
can't remember last time I drove through it. I don't think there is.
It's by the league.
Maybe some planters.
There's some plantings in there, but
Yeah, anything like that. And then
on Google.
developers are putting them more in and Jensen links and stuff. They can pay for it. If it's in our standards, right?
It's not currently, I don't think so, but Dean can verify that.
Okay.
Came up with that. So Tim, are you ready?
You bet.
Okay.
Put a sign,
And Dean, the question that Mayor had was, does our standard say that we can put something in the middle of the roundabout, right? Instead of leaving it empty, like a planter, a cultural element, or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are definitely standards that we follow around from the Canadian standards. We haven't really solidified individual custom standards to St. Albert. We more follow Canadian standards and relevant kind of, even from the US and federal standards around roundabouts and the interior landscaping, because there's height requirements and sightline requirements that need to be achieved as well. And so we're investigating that, and we're looking to what we can do right from the internal kind of landscaping components to even the concrete and the coloring and whatnot, what we want to try and standardize so we don't get caught where we have a variety of different infrastructure out there around the city.
What's wrong with the variety different? If it's
Within reason, it's not so bad, but as it would have cost implications for maintain as the city takes over these assets and attempts to maintain them, there's ultimately going to be cost implications to our RMR projects. And this is what our stance is, even applying our standard concrete mix and whatnot, we would much rather have something like that for sustainability of asset management than getting to a degree of high customized individual asset creation and like installation throughout the city. The internal, in terms of looks and landscaping and brush and stuff like that, great. Hard infrastructure like the concrete and whatnot, and even for the coloring. So there's, as an example, the benefit to standardizing it would be what is a mountable curb, and there's associated color to non-mountable that we can, whether it be a roundabout or a curb extension that is kind of a no-go zone for vehicles. Drivers become a little more aware. And then a mountable curbing would be a different kind of look, or it's similar. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not looking to redo the islands of St. Albert Trail and St. Anne, but something within reason and aesthetically pleasing, but also has that meaning behind it.
okay.
Well, thank you. There you go, Tim. We may have to rush a little bit because we have two more presenters to go through.
Yeah, no problem. We can go. So the next few slides are really just demonstrating some of the 2022 projects. This breakdown of our $80.3 million capital budget with the city of St. Albert, broken down by sector, and then we get into some of the projects that we've got. So on the transportation side, Villeneuve Road rebuild phase 1, North St. Albert Trail phase 2, Ray-Gibbon Drive phase 2, which is well underway with the bridge construction as well as the road work, neighborhood traffic calming in Lennox, as well as a few active transportation projects. And in particular, we're working at Sir Winston Churchill this year, as well as design at Jensen Lakes Rivercrest down the road. Next slide. Couple of the miscellaneous projects that the CPO office is taking care of this year is the installation of a boat launch at Kingswood Park, as well as a disc golf course. Improvements to the police building, as well as neighborhood park development. There's a project at Fountain Park Playground underway this year. Next slide. Design projects, continuing on with active transportation options. Parking lot rehabilitation. So there is going to be work this year at Liberton, and some of the design projects underway is Kingswood Day Loop, Woodlands, St. Albert Senior Center, as well as St. Albert Place. North at St. Albert Trail phase 3, as well as the future phases of Ray-Gibbon Drive, Villeneuve Road phase 2, and various intersection improvements, including Hebert and St. Albert Trail, sorry about that, and then continued noise study projects. On the utility side, Sheridan Drive storm improvements, as well as Gladstone Crescent sanitary upgrade. And on the RMR side with transportation, it's the yearly milling and overlay program where there's a large array of locations that are being completed this year: Erin Ridge, Woodlands, Deer Ridge, North Ridge, Lacombe, Langley, St. Battelle, Graham, and Heritage. Our sidewalk and trail rehabilitation this year, Levasseur, as well as Red Willow Trail are being worked on. Roadway reconstruction, as well as bridge repair and inspections, a parking lot program, and back lanes. Utilities RMR, Mission Grinder demolition, St. Anne Street sewer replacement, Giroux Road water main upsizing, and Grandin Booster decommissioning. And then two major projects that we are using the construction management at risk is the Fountain Park Pool and St. Albert Place life cycle renewal projects that are underway.
This one, we got grant funding as well this year, 5 point.
For which ones?
We did get the announcement that.
For which one?
St. Albert Place.
St. Albert Place.
5 million
Nice.
accessibility.
5.7.
5.7.
And my final slide here is just to
Plus
demonstrate what we are doing to help our communication. So the city does publish a construction projects map. It used to be a hard copy and it became an online map. And you know, the comment earlier about it being a stagnant type of map, we're working to improve that. So on a monthly basis, we are going in as the construction proceeds, the CPO office will go update the status of the various projects, take off projects that are closed, add in new projects that are coming down the line. But it's really, we want to keep this as a dynamic map so that, you know, stakeholders, the residents are able to go to this location to obtain the information on construction projects so that they know what the status is and it isn't going to show plans for 2021. So we've really taken a big step this year. You know, the pop-ups will lead to a web page specific to the individual projects where they are created. And that's where we can get detailed information. And that's the location where we could possibly look to put the upgraded aerial photography, the drone footage on these web pages, you know, on a more frequent basis so people can see what's happening, what stages the projects are at, just almost as a showcasing of the projects. In addition, the CPO office does manage the construction help desk. And in 2021, there was over 1,700 calls come into the construction help desks. In 5 years, it's been approximately 275% increase in the number of calls that have come in. So it's a very valuable piece of our communication to be able to relay information, like a one-stop shop to take information, relay it to the project managers, and then get timely information back to the residents. So in closing, yes.
So for example, you said there's a lot of milling happening this year. So in the past, I feel like you live in Erin Ridge and it's getting milled in front of your street. You go there, it tells you what that, and then you click on it and it just gives you a generic page about milling and grinding. It says, what are you talking that are going to be specific to each individual road? Just kind of give updates on timelines?
You know, the best way I see this happening for a project like that, where it's going to have multiple locations, is likely having the one larger area for maybe Erin Ridge and maybe one for North Ridge, but then click on that pop-up map and lead to a location where it's going to give more project specifics in there. That's how I see that project developing.
Okay, cool. I mean,
So
But do you have it already is the question.
No, it's not defined. No, they're not defined yet. In fact, all of the individual work is still being evaluated by the project manager and the team as far as, you know, delineating what work is happening where. You know, we have the scope or the locations are identified, but the individual project details of where curb and gutter is getting replaced, that's ongoing because we want to get real-time information to the contractor and mark it out. So in closing,
Any general question to CPO then? Thank you.
yeah.
I've got questions
No, that was good. Thanks, Tim. Very good.
along the way.
Passed along the way.
Yeah, that was really good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Now it's corporate asset management, which is embedded within the infrastructure planning branch. And we have Lorraine, who is a one team member.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to the next slide, please?
Okay.
Okay, so good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. I'm Lorraine, and today I'll be discussing what is asset management. There'll be a short video on why invest in asset management, current asset management resources and AM operational structure, the asset management framework. I'm going to talk about the accomplishments to date and where we are within that AM framework. And then I'll finish with future state of asset management. So what is asset management? Well, the formal definition of asset management from ISO 55000 is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. It is a systematic process of developing, operating, maintaining, upgrading, and disposing of assets in the most cost-effective manner. As an asset management organization, it is about delivering quality, accessible, and valued services for our customers and citizens. Next slide, please, Donnie. I'm not going to read the list of benefits, but I will summarize it as we manage our assets to minimize risk and optimize benefit to citizens by executing the right work, the right investment at the right time for the right reasons. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to be showing a short 5-minute video for why to invest in asset management.
So Sean's going to bring it up, and this one you have seen it before.
The FCM one?
Yeah.
It's so good.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and.
But I'm a
nerd.
Hi, I'm Lisa, the mayor of my town. The role of my council is to ensure that residents are provided with services that are essential to our quality of life, like clean drinking water and sanitation, transportation, parks and recreation services. Our community's infrastructure assets are critical to deliver these services. Today, like in many Canadian communities, 1/3 of my town's assets are in poor condition, in part because most of our assets were built in the 50s and 60s and are reaching the end of their useful life. At the same time, our community has grown, and so has the demand for new and improved services. We've also had to spend money to upgrade our assets to comply with new environmental and safety standards. We made investment decisions based on our ability to finance the upfront development costs. However, the bigger ongoing costs to operate, maintain, and eventually replace these assets were not fully built into the analysis. Plus, our assets are vulnerable. Climate change has resulted in impacts from more severe storms, flooding, and other unexpected events. Our assets were not designed with these impacts in mind. For example, one of our roads was washed out during last spring's flood, and we had to reprioritize and redirect money in response. Now we're caught in a cycle where new infrastructure is needed to service growth that has been sprawling beyond the core. Residents count on us to deliver exceptional services. We need to catch up on overdue maintenance of existing assets and to finance the replacements of our old ones. We strive to keep taxes and fees low. However, the revenue we collect to manage all this isn't keeping pace with it all. So my council has been faced with some tough decisions. Do we adjust tax rates? Do we delay maintenance and repairs even longer and risk the consequences? How much should we place annually in a reserve fund? Do we reduce the level of services? Do we delay new projects? So what are we doing? We're engaging in asset management planning to be more strategic about how we manage our assets and spending. We're reviewing our assets across all departments in a holistic and integrated way. We're evaluating the full life cycle costs of different capital assets and land use decisions to ensure we're choosing the best long-term option for the community. To become more resilient to a changing climate, we're developing a climate adaptation plan and starting to identify how we can become less dependent on fossil fuels. We now recognize the value of the services our natural assets provide, like managing stormwater and improving water quality. We're also speaking to residents about the cost of service delivery and their needs and priorities. All this work is helping us to coordinate our infrastructure work and set priorities. Now we have an ongoing process in place that is proactive and allows us now to make better informed and strategic decisions. We're now much better placed to support my town's economy and our residents' quality of life sustainably. The health of our assets is central to achieving these goals. Do some of my town's challenges seem familiar to you?
Good one. Ina.
Okay, so do you want to click? Yeah, click please. Yeah. So some of the key takeaways from this video for why invest in asset management are: 1, a structured approach to sustainable service delivery and environmental stewardship. 2, to review assets in a more holistic and integrated way. 3, evidence-based decision-making. 4, business continuity. And 5, transparency, support, and continuous improvement. Asset management operates like a hub and spoke with the corporate AM team as the hub and asset champions within each department being the spokes. The 2-person corporate AM team is currently embedded in engineering services. The primary role of the corporate AM team is to develop, coordinate, and maintain and continually improve the asset management program at a corporate level. As Donnie had mentioned, within each department, asset champions have been identified for each asset portfolio. The success of the AM program is dependent on many stakeholders throughout the organization doing additional AM work on top of their regular responsibilities. A total of 25 asset portfolios have been identified for all departments as shown in the graphic. In this portion of the presentation, examples or more detail will be presented for the road asset portfolio only. So the AM framework was developed using the ISO 55000 standard and the International Infrastructure Management Manual, which is a top-down hierarchy. It provides a roadmap of how we provide asset management throughout the city. It is a system of interrelated elements that ensures that the city's strategic goals and objectives translate into on-the-ground operational activities. Starting from the top, identified in the orange box, is the city's strategic framework. Council has seen this before, so I will summarize as the city follows an established strategic framework to align the city's strategic and business planning, budgeting, management, and reporting practices and processes to achieve outcomes established in the community vision and pillars of sustainability and the city's council strategic plan. These components, together with council's bylaws, policies, and resolutions, provide direction to the CAO for decision-making related to strategic and business planning, budgeting, management, and implementation of initiatives to achieve established outcomes and corporate reporting to council and community. The city's asset management framework is guided by and in alignment with the strategic framework with respect to vision and planning. And then the prioritizing, actioning, and measuring is an outcome of asset management. Moving down, we have the AM policy, which has been approved, which sets the intention and direction of the city as formally expressed by the leadership team. It sets the foundation with which the structure of asset management is built. Next, Don. Oh, the inventory, got it, okay. The CAO, DCO publishes the administrative directive on how they will develop the asset management plan, the collaboration, the efficiencies, the continuous improvement, and a consistent framework. The AM committee is the main governing body for asset management and meets 4 times per year. Then moving to the yellow circular part of the graphic, we have the strategic elements, which consist of the state of infrastructure report, asset management strategy, and the strategic asset management plan. The state of infrastructure report is created to communicate the state of repair for infrastructure assets essential to the delivery of public services and to outline the financial requirements to maintain the current stock of assets. It provides information to answer 6 key asset management questions. Number 1, what do we have? 2, what is it worth? 3, what condition is it in? 4, what do we need to do to it? 5, when do we need to do it? And 6, and how much money do we need? So the city's strategic approach to asset management will be split into two documents, being the AM strategy and the strategic asset management plan. The AM strategy is the how. It outlines the high-level strategic approach that the organization takes to asset management. In other words, how it proposes to manage its assets. The strategic asset management plan has a pivotal role in the asset management document hierarchy. It links the city's strategic framework objectives to asset management objectives and outlines the high-level strategic actions that are required in order to ensure that the asset management objectives are achieved. Identified in the red is the corporate asset management plan, which is a template that asset stewards will use for their business units asset management plan to support consistent asset reporting across the organization. And then moving to the green circular part of the graphic, we have the operational elements, which consists of the asset management plans, the project execution, and database update. The asset management plans are long-term plans that outline the asset activities and programs for each service area and resources applied to provide a defined level of service in the most cost-effective way. Information defined in these plans are owners, level of service, life cycle strategies, budget, climate change, risk, etc. These business department unit plans align to the strategic asset management plan, AM policy, and council priorities. And skipping to the circular part of the graph, the blue performance and evaluation improvement, we have the performance evaluation and improvement where we evaluate how well we are doing in achieving the asset management objectives and outcomes identified in the asset management strategy and the strategic asset management plan and the department unit asset management plans. Performance and evaluation ensures continuous improvement within the framework. So in essence, planned activities at the department business unit level for an asset need to be in alignment to the city's strategic framework, the AM policy, and the strategic asset management plan. Can you click, Donnie? Thank you. This is, okay, so risk management is part of every level and every element of asset management. Recently, the city has developed an integrated risk management framework, which is in draft form, that will be applied throughout the AM framework. Because risks are not static and always changing, it is important to monitor and review the risks. This is where we are today. This is the first iteration of the AM framework, and over time and with continuous improvement, this framework will change. Also, it is noted that some asset stewarding groups are further ahead in their asset management journey and are currently doing some of the work identified in the circular part of the graphic. Asset management major accomplishments. Since the AM team's inception in 2019, the team had developed a number of AM documents and management tools that set the foundation for the asset management program. The following slides will speak to some of these major accomplishments. Next, please. Oh, yeah. We talked about the AM committee within the AM framework. We also have an AM working group, which has been established to create synergies in asset management planning and practice. The group is comprised of director-appointed stakeholders that can strongly influence the management practice of an asset. The idea is to share experience, knowledge, and information regarding the management of assets across the organization. Collaboratively, we can implement more effective asset management processes. Next, please. In the asset classes document, all physical asset classes within the city are defined and are in alignment with the Alberta Municipal Affairs Tangible Capital Assets Accounting Standard. In this way, physical assets can be seamlessly rolled up to the TCA level for financial reporting. Major asset class is a group of tangible capital assets that is significantly different in design and use. Minor asset class is a classification within a major class that has unique characteristics. Subclass or subclasses are just further classifications that may be used at the discretion of the asset steward. Here is an example of how the asset classes are defined for transportation physical assets for roadways. So the major TCA is engineered structures, the minor TCA is the roadway system, and then subclasses have been further broken down into different asset portfolios. So for example, the roadways, a subclass could be broken down into arterial, collector, and local. The asset hierarchy exists to provide functional groupings and subgroupings for work leveraging an asset, whether it be asset rationalization, capital planning, or operational tasks. Structure is defined from highest level to lowest level granularity. Different forms of information are required at various levels within the organization for decision making. So as an example, an operational worker would be concerned with assets at the component level, whereas council would be concerned with an asset at a portfolio level. In 2019, we developed a maturity matrix to measure the current state of asset management practice within each asset stewarding team. It was based on industry standards developed by International Infrastructure Management Manual, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Urban Systems Asset Smart 2, and modified for use in St. Albert. This matrix was developed so that we can objectively, transparently, and repeatedly assess the asset management practice of our organization. 36 questions within 5 broad categories of maturity assessment included. So for the asset inventory, a good asset inventory is a complete one that includes all assets that an asset stewarding group owns. Some information at the asset inventory being asked includes assets availability, asset hierarchies, condition, current replacement value. And moving on to information, procedures, policies, and practices that support asset management through the documentation for data integrity, maintenance, planning, prioritization, and energy management. The software involved questions surrounding what software is being used for maintenance, capital planning, project management, and energy management. Is the software interoperable? In other words, do they talk to each other? Can information be easily transferred from one system to another? Software is important as it can expedite processes and improve efficiencies. Proper asset management tools can easily raise the level of asset management maturity. The physical condition assessment procedures involve questions that were formulated to determine if there are assessment programs in place and if these assessments are being undertaken by qualified personnel so that risk can be mitigated. And then lastly, on to people. A thorough understanding of people capabilities will inform the organization where gaps exist with respect to AM, awareness, cross-functional teams, role in asset management, etc. So the end product for the assessment of asset maturity is a number of spider diagrams for each interview conducted. So for example, we will have one for public work buildings, one for roads, one for traffic signals, one for utilities, etc. Using the asset management maturity matrix, maturity assessments were completed for all 25 asset stewarding groups, and the results are shown in this graphic. One common theme with most of the assessments was that the software, shown in gray, ranked low because either software tools were not available or unknown to the group. And then based on the results, 25 maturity improvement plans were created to identify gaps and recognize areas of improvement. Here is a spider diagram for the roads maturity assessment. In general, levels can range from very low maturity levels of 1 to 2 and having none to little data to support AM. This is what we would expect to see in the early stages of asset management. Maturity levels of 4 to 5, which represents competent and excellent data. This level of maturity can take organization years to achieve. This is ideally where we want to be. The roads portfolio is one of the more mature portfolios within the organization. Their asset inventories and condition assessments are indicating high levels of maturity, while software is indicating low level maturity, as they currently do not have an asset management software. The lack of AM software was found to be typical throughout the organization. I will talk more about this later, but we are currently putting together an RFP for an enterprise maintenance management asset management software. It is noted, sorry, I'm just not quite finished. It is noted that since this assessment, the transportation group has made great strides in improving their maturity for the roads portfolio and their other 7 asset portfolios. So, as mentioned in the previous slide, maturity improvement plans were developed for each asset portfolio based on the maturity assessment. Here's an example of a schedule developed in collaboration with the transportation team for the roads asset portfolio. There are 5 phases for each maturity improvement plan developed. Phases 1 and 2 were inventory and condition. Once inventory attributes have been populated, condition needs to be assessed. Assets can be brought into the asset inventory through capital budget, RMR process, developer contribute assets or donations. Once the condition is understood, then asset life cycle and replacement costs can be projected. Phase 3 is usability. A thorough understanding of levels of service is required to determine usability. Once phase 3 usability is complete, asset management plans can begin to be populated. And then phase 4 talks about total cost of ownership, which I'll describe more on the next slide. And then phase 5 is about growth, which is about reviewing and refining level of service to determine appropriate target level of service to perpetuate sustainable service delivery. So biannual reporting has been set up in ClearPoint to track progress for each asset portfolio and to identify any barriers or obstacles and to keep these maturity improvement plans moving forward. Total cost of ownership. Total cost of ownership is how much an asset costs to own throughout its entire life, from planning, acquisition to retirement disposal, and is tied to corporate business plan 4.5, which is total cost of ownership. A total cost of ownership maturity assessment was completed for each asset portfolio using a 5-point scale identified to the left. The maturity level scale ranges from level 1, where only partial data on capital expenditure on assets exists, to level 5 of being able to report full TCO at the asset level. As we increase in maturity, the level of detail and granularity increases. As shown by the maturity assessment results in the figure to the right, majority of asset portfolios are at maturity levels of 1 to 2, with some at level 3. As mentioned earlier, maturity improvement plans were created, where total cost of ownership was to be developed in phase 4, after phases 1 and 2, inventory and condition, and phase 3, usability. Ideally, we would have liked our asset stewards to follow in that order. However, as part of corporate business plan 4.5, corporate total cost of ownership, the asset stewards were responsible for reporting TCO by the end of February. There were 3 options to report TCO that best suited the asset portfolio maturity level. The expectation for data accuracy and level of detail should match the respective maturity assessment. If asset portfolios reported to be at either level 1 or 2, the macro option template was chosen. Most portfolios reported TCO at the macroscopic level, which represent low level of granularity with low data confidence. Levels 3 to 4 we report either at the meso or micro level, which represents higher data confidence. So in essence, to get to level 5 total cost of ownership, it will take our organization time and more resources. Asset management future state. A number of AM strategic documents within the AM framework, which was presented earlier, need to be developed, such as the State of Infrastructure Report, the AM strategy, and the Strategic Asset Management Plan. At the asset portfolio level, asset management plans need to be developed. The asset management plans provide a clear line of sight for on-the-ground activities being undertaken back to the city strategic framework. These are the tactical plans to make sure the asset provides the expected value. These plans will touch on all aspects of level of service, risk, and growth. Once we reach significant completion of the maturity improvement plans, the asset management plans will serve the purpose that the RMR and long-term capital plan currently serve now. An asset management plan does more than just create a capital ask, but rather outlines the risks and opportunities of capital expenditures on specific assets. For total cost of ownership, significant completion of phases 1 and 2, inventory and condition, and phase 3 usability of the maturity improvement plans need to be realized to be able to develop higher level of maturity for total cost of ownership. The enterprise maintenance management, asset management, software procurement, and implementation will be talked about on the next slide. The enterprise maintenance management, asset management, it's a mouthful, is a powerful software tool that will give a holistic view of the complete asset lifecycle management for all physical assets. Lifecycle management includes planning, procurement, operations and maintenance, and disposal of assets. It will be a first-time tool for many asset stewards and will be leveraged for capital planning, operational planning, project management, and energy management. The bubbles illustrate all the applications that are part of the EMMAM platform that need and produce embedded spatial data. This slide illustrates how big an endeavor the the enterprise maintenance management, asset management, software procurement will be, and how important it is to take the necessary time during the planning stage to get it right. There are a lot of pieces that need to work together for us to fully functional enterprise maintenance management, asset management platform, so that our asset stewards will have the tools necessary to practice asset management. 1.4 million has been approved. Will it be enough? We actually won't know until we go to market. Next slide, please. So here is the roadmap for the enterprise maintenance management asset management project. We are currently entering 2022 Q3 and have been working with our stakeholders on business requirements. The RFP for the enterprise asset management maintenance management is expected to be complete in 2022 Q4 with vendor selection in 2023 Q1. From 2023 Q1 onwards, implementation will be a phased approach. So to conclude, we are all stakeholders of asset management. To successfully implement asset management across the organization, collaboration is necessary from the entire city. Asset management is a continually evolving practice. It is a journey, not a destination. So before I hand it over to Dean, are there any questions?
No. No questions. I just can't see everybody on the screen here, but
thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. And you know what? As a transportation guy, it took Lorraine to explain.
I can answer that question. How do we plan for?
You were not, we were muted.
Oh,
Muted, we were
You
muted.
can hear it. So Dean, there's a question from Councillor Brawhead for Lorraine.
oh,
Perfect. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So how do you plan for a replacement at the end of a useful life of an asset? Take a truck, for example, or a piece of hardware or software, IT software. How do you plan for that replacement?
Well, most of the work actually happens at the planning stages. That's probably the most important aspect of asset management, because that's where you can control the costs. And it's going to be through the life cycling. We project out, let's say, however long the life cycle may be, we will project out for some assets 50 years, like for buildings. For other assets that have a shorter life cycle, they'll be projected out to, let's say, like 5 years. So we'll know when they need replacements, and hopefully that we'll know what kind of money is required by the time that those assets need to be replaced.
And that's part of our budget.
That's correct, yeah.
It's not like a straight line inventory cost or anything like that. It's something a little different.
An example that I could throw out there is when we were doing the Northeast servicing projects, as the project design was progressing, our utility folks said, wait a minute, we don't need a lift station. We can replace that with a siphon option, which means less maintenance down the road, eliminating a lift station altogether. So that's pure application of a total cost of ownership perspective into the planning phase of the project, right? And then definitely the maintenance and operations will come into play even for siphon, but it's much less compared to a lift station.
Right.
I do want to.
That's fine, but talk about something like a dump truck.
Okay. Anything you know about dump truck, Lorraine?
Not really, but but you know what? I can actually talk about, something similar, like, which is a vehicle. Donnie did touch upon total cost of ownership. So in the beginning, we need to actually determine what do we want that dump truck to do. So once we do our research, and we will then, acquire the latest dump truck, and then we'll track the, all the costs, but it's not necessarily picking the capital dollars that is the cheapest. It's the one that's going to provide us the most value over its life cycle. So something may cost a lot more money up front, but in the end, the maintenance costs are going to be quite a bit less. So it's all really about balancing the costs, balancing the performance, balancing the risks. So if you can almost take any asset and put it in that kind of bucket, because we're always going to be balancing those things, and hopefully we provide the best value over its life cycle. And and for how much it costs. I hope that answered your question. I could go in detail on a vehicle for you if you want.
No, I got it. My question is that we plan though for a certain period of time, that dump truck's going to last us X number of years. And at the end of that time, we have to replace it, correct?
Correct.
All right.
Yeah, but that's in a different plan. And you know, as somebody that was involved with risk management, I'm glad to see that we're moving forward in this. But I mean, I guess one of the risks, and you've identified it, Lorraine, and thank you for the presentation. I mean, I guess we've got 1.4 set aside. I mean, and if we step off on this road, I mean, one of the risks is if that's not enough. So I mean, it'd be interesting to see, I mean, how we can look at that risk to say if we don't complete it, and how do we manage that? Because I mean, once we start on the road, you know, it's like anything. If we don't continue, then there's going to be other costs that are actually going to only multiply or magnify. So I think if once we've entered into this process, we're committed.
Absolutely. And
I think we need to continue that. And let's see that. I mean, but anyways.
one of the approaches that Joanne is leading that from the IT group is have a phased approach.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the end goal, but we cannot afford everything now. So can we phase it out such that we can still implement what we are in planning to do?
Yeah.
And one of the points of discussion was how much it's going to cost for licensing and operation maintenance.
Yeah, no. And I mean, it's a total cost of ownership, but it's also then it's part of PPP, sorry, when you look at the entire, what are the drivers? So, I mean, you're right. But if your dump truck analogy is all part of any other asset that goes into how do we provide services and how do we best provide services? Because you may find that dump truck has a different life cycle over different functions, right? So, I mean, but it's also part of another plan that feeds into the asset management plan.
Yeah, I do want to add that I know that the group that is stewarding that asset, they actually are at a really high level of maturity. So they actually are life cycling. They have full total cost of ownership for those vehicles.
Until you unilaterally cut out all of the dollars associated with the replacement plan.
No, but you don't. But you're not doing that though. Because Jay will have a total understanding of.
Well, we've got motions this afternoon to do exactly that.
We won't.
Well,
anyways, Lorraine, thank you. Your presentation. As somebody that used to do this, I kind of got a little excited here.
This is an exciting journey for all of us. And like Lorraine's fleet is very much advanced on the maturity scale. So you will have data to support all the operations and maintenance for a dump truck, right? So
it is a process.
I do want to talk a little bit one more time about the enterprise maintenance management asset management software. We are trying to look at some risk mitigation. And here's an example. I had talked to another organization and what they had done in the first implementation. So it is a phased approach. So let's assume we're going to go to public operations. Let's say that that's the group that we're going to start with. They actually had somebody shadow them and they learned how to implement all the other ones. So the software company only implemented the first asset, and then the people that were shadowing them, they actually did all the implementation from that point forward. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. One is we'll be able to fix things on our own and we're not reliant on the software company. So that is one approach that we're actually considering.
thank you, Lorraine. Over to Dean.
Great. Excellent. Well, hopefully I can build on that asset management excitement and introduce our transportation team. I'm going to be a little bit biased here, maybe, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think the transportation group, we are a pretty diverse and a little bit complex group, being that we deal with operations in terms of traffic management. We're venturing into the planning side of things as well, with city master plans, with ASP reviews, design reviews on the development side and whatnot. And then we're also an individual asset owner group as well. So being that we had a previous lunch and learn with council members, which I appreciated everyone's time during that, we're going to focus today around our asset management side. So as you can see from the graphic here, again, we kind of reach across the diverse boards here, working with the capital projects group, the utility groups, and they're kind of coordinating projects and whatnot. Our asset management is a key component. And then with the planning and development as well. The engineering and transportation team provides services relevant to municipal strategic planning, management of certain governance documents, such as the traffic bylaw and transportation systems bylaw, as well as we oversee council policies relevant to the neighborhood traffic traffic calming and the residential permit parking. We support the planning development group, perform operational oversight of traffic management and a wide range of asset management on a variety of pieces of infrastructure, and support a multitude of capital planning projects along with the delivery through our CPO group. We also manage and apply a wide variety of data resources and tools, inclusive of our custom traffic model, traffic management system platforms. We perform annual data collection, management, and apply information relevant to our operations, such as vehicle speeds, classification, volume, and safety information, such as motor vehicle collisions. And again, still going through with a wide variety of data around our asset management on condition ratings and updated assessments. We're owners of the Transportation Master Plan and the resulting implementation of recommendations from the report. The most recent TMP was updated in 2014, 2015, with the final report being completed. And a lot of work has been done relevant to the recommendations and strategic actions of implementing our TMP, including a wide variety of arterial corridor improvements, ITS strategies and guidelines, such as intelligent transportation systems, complete streets, transportation safety plan, and we oversee all of those which have individual implementation plans as well to those. We oversee network screening again on the safety side for motor vehicle collisions, and oversee development and updates and implementation of safety plans, again, such as the neighborhood traffic calming, which was previously aligned with the Safe Journeys to School work as well. And we perform in-service safety reviews on priority collision-prone sites and areas that we're seeing trends of negative safety influence. We again also oversee the traffic management system and our traffic controls from road marking signs and traffic signals. And I'm going to just kind of jump because I know we're kind of running low on time. So I think for the gist of it, you guys get a good handle and a good grip on what the transportation group does. A key area for us, again, and a key target discussion point is again around our asset management for a multitude of assets that we oversee. Again, this is a kind of an overview of some of the targeted oversight areas around infrastructure that we take care of, largely all related to servicing mobility for the transportation network. Assets include a wide range to service users and include the full network for all classifications of roadways, so from the arterial to the collector and local and back lanes, along with supplemental infrastructure such as curb and gutter for the roadways. We oversee bridge and parking lot structures, as well as traffic management systems, inclusive of signal controls, warning systems, traffic signs, and road markings, as well as active mode infrastructure along sidewalks and trails. In total, these assets have been summarized into 8 different asset class groups, which represent approximately 33% or 1/3 of the city's asset management portfolio. We'll target today's discussion and examples around our asset management practice towards roadways. As we know, this is kind of a key public interest area, and we hear a lot of engagement and feedback from residents around managing our roadways. However, I'd like to point out maybe in general that each of these areas, although perhaps at different levels to what Lorraine was kind of referencing, levels of maturity may be different in regards to where we're at with our asset management practice and where we stand. They all follow a very similar philosophical approach around ongoing condition ratings, prioritization, evidence management practices, and ultimately we're seeking delivery of effective and sustainable asset management. For roadways, the true process begins at the planning stages, such as area structure plans and subdivisions, to which the Transportation Department supports review of necessary technical documents, such as the transportation impact assessments and design drawings. The network considerations at the planning level ensure that roadways align to high-level planning, such as the MDP and Transportation Master Plan, incorporate an existing and forecasted demand modeling to reflect on anticipated levels of service for the roadways, and the proposed designs meet necessary and up-to-date municipal engineering standards. Once approved at the planning and development levels, the roadways are then scheduled for construction to our partners of the development community if they are relevant to neighborhood developments, or perhaps the project may be aligned to a capital network improvement, such as an arterial roadway, and the construction may be led by the city ourselves. Once construction is completed for either scenario, a final acceptance certificate or FAC is applied, and the asset or multiple assets of the project become part of the city's inventory and part of our group's asset management programming. Our road network inventory follows plan condition assessments and inspections, with our arterial network reviewed annually and the remaining network of collectors and locals inspected at approximately 1/3 of the city per year, with a 3 full network data collection timeline. The condition ratings are compiled with other criteria to help inform on short to moderate term asset management plans. And further work is performed to capture project level details and information such as design or survey work that is then used to help prioritize roadway candidates. And the Transportation Department develops and updates applicable roadway charters for council's consideration during budget deliberation. As can be expected, the accuracy of the asset management plan becomes more difficult as the timeline is extended. The focus involves the development of a very strong 3 to 5 year plan. And beyond this level is an awareness of forthcoming candidate roadways and estimated costs. However, the years of actual delivery may be influenced and subject to results of future condition ratings and reprioritization. Once the budget for the RMR programming is approved, the Transportation Department works with the CPO group or Capital Projects Office very closely together to complete necessary and required projects designs, and then the formal project delivery is handed over to the CPO group, and the Transportation Department really acts as project owners and provides technical support through Faisal's involvement and whatnot. The CPO provide necessary project oversight and monitoring and help keep programs on schedule and within budget. Once the project is completed, the asset re-enters the pavement inventory at a new condition rating and will then be further investigated in alignment with future condition assessments. To put the city's roadway asset inventory in perspective, we currently manage approximately 70 kilometers of arterial roadways, 80 kilometers of collector roadways, and 192 kilometers of local roadway for a total network inventory of about 342 kilometers. To replace this full network value, the cost would be just shy of $1 billion. And Donnie had to tell me not to do the Austin Powers villain $1 billion reference, but
Yeah. You can do it, Dean.
that's it. I know I turned swivel in my chair in a very precarious way. But of course, with such full replacement costs, administration is consistently applying preventative maintenance strategies. And this is through time material treatments or processes such as microsurfacing, crack sealing, mill and overlay treatments, and with the full intent and effort to maximize the life expectancy of our network while maintaining appropriate levels of service associated for our users, comforts, and confidence within the road network itself. This graphic is an example of what a road deterioration graph looks like. The horizontal axis represents the years aging of the roadway over time, while the vertical axis represents the deterioration and lowering pavement quality index or PQI level for this graphic. So this isn't necessarily set in stone or represents every roadway out there in the industry, but it is a good practice. And this shows the assumptions and highlights how the pavement quality of a sample roadway may deteriorate over time. The performance of the road remains relatively high for the first 20-ish years or so and begins to decline significantly afterwards. At some point, the road will pass its serviceable life and will need to be replaced or fully reconstructed. However, actioning preservation and restoration techniques and treatments at appropriate timelines and at appropriate condition levels helps to maximize life expectancy of the roadway for a longer term performance while minimizing costs over the long term as well. So simply put, a simple way of expressing the life expectancy and cost benefit would be stating the right treatment at the right time for the right roadway. This graphic highlights the influence of time treatments on the roadway's life. For clarity, this again is an example of a brand new section of roadway. Segments that may be older roadways may have previous treatment of a granular base, and there's approximately 3/4 of road structures out there right now with clay or soil cement based structures. So these roads delivered and completed up to new standards with a granular base as we address them through our projects with full replacement or reconstruction. This slide shows some photo examples of the preservation and restoration treatments that we often apply here in St. Albert, with the objective of strategically timing the treatments to extend the life of the roadway to avoid highly disruptive and the higher costs associated with a full reconstruction that's shown there on the right. In alignment with delivering these preventative or restoration strategies, the road network requires prioritization to which a variety of applicable RMR projects may be applied. As council is aware, administration has separated our funding requests and thus our projects into the various roadway classifications, where we have an arterial program, a collector program, a local program, and then even back lane program. These reflect the funding requests to address network priority needs of preservation and restoration relevant to each individual class of roadway. However, there is only one single budget requested from administration for roadway rehabilitation or the reconstruction. So that budget or project charter represents all classes of roadway where reconstruction may be applied. Prioritizing candidates for completion of improvements utilizes a variety of inputs. So going back to the comment, I believe it was Councilor Mackay that kind of said, we do take action, we do take data, we are evidence-based, and we apply system and process to strategically address our network needs. The process itself has matured and adjusted over time as more information and network data considerations become available and stronger collaboration occurs between a variety of stakeholders. It's anticipated that we'll continue to expand and improve on these actions in our programs to address for new or forthcoming community needs and priorities. Currently, the process focuses largely on an evidence-based system that first applies the road network assessments or the condition ratings. The review uses inputs such as the structural integrity, ride conditions, surface distress that are compiled to reflect, put together and kind of provide the pavement quality index, or again, that PQI. These values also reflect more tangible road user experience. So when the roadway may be represented as surface conditions that are rough or uncomfortable for road users. The department also then seeks to apply further inputs to help prioritize as roadways, some roadways may have similar PQI levels. And so additional inputs such as reports of public concern with roadway conditions, work plan to adjacent or along the roadway, other impactful infrastructure programs, which may be supplemental asset condition information or prioritization associated with those assets, such as utilities or the sidewalk, curb and gutter. And the input also recognizes a critical component of collaboration between city departments, such as utilities. So obviously, as was commented earlier, what we don't want to do is go in and replace a roadway or address a roadway, and then there's a utility project that is subsurface and ultimately removes what we just constructed. Further societal inputs such as adjacent land use, demographic influence, operational data, and municipal service delivery considerations are also taken into account through our process. And the Transportation Department attempts to collaborate with internal stakeholders to help inform on possible priorities and recognize implications of work occurring. While we're continuously seeking to improve our maintenance planning and our asset management practices, one additional key area administration is intending to improve is our communications. And so this goes back to what has been kind of stated earlier around opportunity, whether it be on our capital project side, but even with our RMR work as well. I hope that this overview and this presentation through the department kind of gives some confidence in terms of the level of quality of service that we're trying to provide to our community. We want to take advantage of having well-informed and engaged residents, which I believe in St. Albert, we're very lucky to have very engaged residents. And but with that engagement, give them the understanding and the background in terms of our delivery of our projects, their objectives, the priorities and the influences and the inputs that have gone into our decision making and our prioritization and planning. So this starts right at the higher level of the philosophical or procedural considerations of our programming, right down to the specific information around asset program delivery. And we want to be able to share this information, have it user-friendly and available, that residents can have opportunity to gain access to. I'll give an example, maybe as one that council members may be aware of and responding to as well, that we often in administration receive resident concerns around our roadway programs in association with impacts and responsibility of the private resident driveways and the drive aprons. And so we're in process right now of just finalizing a bit of a proactive information sharing document that we can put out there. And it really kind of focuses on an administrative process, but how we address drive aprons and driveways, hopefully to improve the understanding of what is the city responsibilities, when will we become involved with these typically private pieces of infrastructure, and what are the resident responsibilities, and when it comes to addressing needs, and make it non-subjective and as relevant for residents to apply and be aware. In addition, we're also applying for a proactive resident engagement feedback process through our 2022 roadway RMR projects, with the intention objective to proactively engage and receive feedback on possible site concerns from residents. So before we go into road area, local street, we'll contact the residents. We have contacted the residents, letting them know this work is planned for 2022. And if they could please share any concerns of, maybe drainage, maybe some sidewalk concerns where there may be some cracked or failing sidewalk or curb and gutter, let them engage with us first and let us know. And then we'll go out and perform site validation and through site inspections and hopefully be well aware and able to address what we hear as concerns. And then also it informs us a little bit as to what may be perceived as a concern that may be outside of scope, or maybe actually still functional and operational in terms of our standards and whatnot, and that meets our expectations. And so I think 2 minutes over. There is one, I know leading up to this presentation, there was, I believe, council information or question that was provided around some of our sidewalk as well. And we didn't really touch base on this component, but in terms of our Safe Walks Canada and our grinding for trip hazards, we have a citywide trip hazard program for our sidewalks that is occurring. The level of service that we provide, we're grinding anything at above or at 12.5 or half an inch is what our current trip hazard program is addressing.
Thank you, Dean. Any question? I know we are a little bit over time here. We can conclude it with this.
No, thanks, Dean. I know I'm thanks. I know, Dean, like you identified the trip hazards. You talk about the total cost of doing something. When we got caught in that whole milling when we used a different process and it resulted in substandard work, and then we have rework, right? So, you talk about total cost of something or risk. You have to factor that all in. So, no, appreciate the information. Thank you. No, that's good.
For questions, and we can conclude and go off to the 2 o'clock council meeting.
Dean, sorry.
You were thinking, I could hear it here.
Well, I could hear it all. There was a buzz. Donnie might know it probably, or somebody here knows. Is there a landscaping project for the middle of Ray Gibbon Drive, or is there engineering standards that says you can't put trees or shrubs in that central area?
So one thing we really want to, it's more consideration of future costs and lost costs or impacts, because technically, we know that the future sees Ray Gibbon Drive transitioning to an 8-lane freeway with interchanges, and some of that widening and accommodation of the new lanes will influence that median. So what you see out there being delivered with the simplistic widening from the 2-lane to 4-lane cross section, we don't want to really plant anything within that area, because just in time, as the trees are nice and mature, would be the time that you potentially are looking at a forecasted, going ultimately transitioning from a 4-lane to a 6-lane, and then over time to an 8-lane. But our focus and emphasis, there will definitely be, it won't be just mounds of dirt. Everything will be leveled off and likely sodded. And then landscaping, though, more focus will be on the east and west boulevards.
Okay, well, fair enough. It's just, it's going to be a significant thoroughfare through our community. We have an opportunity to influence everybody that drives along that roadway. And if we present an aesthetically pleasing drive, that's a good reflection on our community. And 6 lanes or 8 lanes, that's not in my lifetime. So I'm just wondering what we're going to do during my lifetime to make it look pretty.
Yeah, the initial, I think we can definitely take that away as feedback and whatnot. And maybe there's something, the one thing you probably don't want is landscaping recommendations from a transportation guy. So,
well, maybe we do, because it might be cheaper.
Yeah, that's, but I think maybe there's something reasonable that we can go back and look with our environmental group and our landscaping group from public operations. One other, I mean, we have this, so I don't want to, in arterial roadways that are currently posted at slightly lower speeds, but any consideration for maintenance or anything like that. I think it's a wide median, so I don't immediately jump to conclusions to have any safety issue or anything like that with maintaining anything in the median, but I'd want their feedback and their comments.
Fair enough. Leave it with you.
No, I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And any more questions from Councillor Hughes or anyone online? Right. Okay. That concludes the engineering workshop. I know it's a little bit rushed and a lot of information, but any lingering questions after this, just.
It was very helpful. Really, it was. It's particularly pertinent today, I think. It's just.
Good job to engineering.
Thank you.
Teams. Thank you for that.